There are places in the ancient world where history feels unfinished, as if something vital has been lost between the stones. The vast ruins of Hampi stretch across a surreal landscape, filled with massive structures whose construction still raises questions. In Turkey, the enigmatic carvings of Mount Nemrut sit atop a remote peak, their original purpose and symbolism still debated. In Egypt, the colossal statues of Abu Simbel temples are aligned with the sun in a way that illuminates the inner sanctuary on specific days each year, revealing a level of precision that continues to amaze researchers. These sites remind us that the past is not just something we study, it is something we are still trying to understand. The Richborough Roman Gateway stands today as one of the most intriguing architectural mysteries of Roman Britain. Located within the archaeological remains of Richborough Roman Fort, this enormous monument once dominated the landscape of southeastern Britain nearly 2,000 years ago. To modern visitors, only the massive foundations remain, an enormous square platform of stone and Roman concrete rising from the earth. Yet archaeological evidence suggests that what once stood here was not simply a gate or fortification, but a monumental, triumphal arch of extraordinary scale. Its existence raises a series of questions that historians and archaeologists continue to explore. Why did the Romans construct such a massive ceremonial structure in what was then a remote frontier region? How exactly was it built? And how did its materials survive for nearly 2 millennia in the damp climate of Britain? To understand the significance of the Richborough Gateway, it is necessary to look back to the early years of Roman expansion into Britain. In the year 43 CE, the Roman Empire launched a major invasion of the island under the command of Emperor Claudius. Historical accounts suggest that Roman forces landed somewhere along the southeastern coast of Britain, and many archaeologists believe that Richborough, known in Roman times as Rutupii, was one of the primary landing points. From this strategic coastal position, Roman troops began establishing control over the surrounding territory, constructing roads, forts, and administrative centers that would eventually transform Britannia into a Roman province. And Richborough soon developed into a major military and logistical hub. Ships from the European mainland arrived here regularly, bringing soldiers, merchants, and supplies into the expanding frontier of the empire. At some point during the late 1st century CE, the Romans constructed an enormous monument at the center of the settlement. Archaeological excavations carried out during the 20th century revealed the remains of a gigantic square foundation, measuring roughly 25 meters on each side and several meters deep. The size of the platform immediately puzzled archaeologists. Such foundations were far larger than those required for ordinary buildings or gates. Instead, the structure strongly resembled the bases of triumphal arches known from the city of Rome and other major Roman urban centers. So based on these comparisons, many scholars believe that the Richborough monument was once a towering ceremonial arch, possibly rising more than 25 meters above the ground. If this reconstruction is correct, the gateway would have been one of the largest Roman monuments ever built in Britain. The question, however, is why such a monumental arch was constructed at Richborough in the first place. In Rome and other imperial cities, triumphal arches commemorated military victories or honored emperors. They were political monuments, designed to display the power and permanence of the Roman state. Yet Richborough was not a great metropolis. During the 1st century, it functioned primarily as a frontier port and military base. Some historians believe the arch may have commemorated the successful conquest of Britain and marking the symbolic entrance of Roman authority into the new province. Others suggest it may have celebrated the arrival of Emperor Claudius himself, who briefly visited Britain during the early stages of the campaign. Despite these theories, no surviving inscriptions have been found that definitively explain the monument's purpose. The original meaning of the gateway therefore remains uncertain. Beyond its symbolic significance, the engineering of the Richborough Gateway reveals an extraordinary level of Roman technical skill. The massive foundation was constructed using opus caementitium, the famous Roman concrete that allowed engineers to build structures on a scale rarely seen before in the ancient world. Layers of stone rubble were bound together with lime-based mortar and volcanic aggregates, forming a rock-like material capable of supporting immense weight. What makes the Richborough Foundation particularly remarkable is its size and uniformity. Instead of being built in small segments, the base appears to have been poured and assembled as a single massive block. Achieving such a feat required careful coordination of labor, materials, and timing. Workers would have needed to mix enormous quantities of mortar and aggregate, while ensuring that each layer bonded perfectly with the next. Yet the most fascinating aspect of the Richborough structure lies not simply in its scale, but in the extraordinary durability of its materials. Nearly 2,000 years after its construction, the foundation still survives as a solid mass, rising above the surrounding ground. This endurance is particularly striking, given the challenging environmental conditions of southern Britain. The region experiences frequent rainfall, fluctuating temperatures, and soil moisture that can rapidly erode many types of masonry. Over the centuries, storms, flooding, and human activity have all reshaped the landscape around the site. Despite these pressures, the Roman concrete used in the Richborough Gateway has remained remarkably stable. Modern scientific studies of Roman concrete have revealed why these materials are so resilient. Unlike many modern concretes that rely on purely chemical curing processes, Roman builders often incorporated volcanic ash or similar mineral components into their mixtures. These materials reacted slowly with lime and water, forming crystalline structures that continued to strengthen over time. And in some cases, exposure to moisture actually improved the durability of the concrete rather than weakening it. While the exact composition of the Richborough mixture is still being studied, its long survival suggests that Roman engineers possessed a deep practical understanding of how to create construction materials capable of enduring centuries of environmental stress. Another intriguing detail is how the Romans integrated brick and stone elements within the concrete core. Archaeologists examining the Richborough Foundation have noted the presence of carefully arranged brick courses embedded within the structure. These layers may have served several purposes. They could have helped distribute structural loads more evenly, prevented cracking as the concrete settled, or allowed builders to maintain precise alignment during construction. Whatever their exact function, the combination of materials created a hybrid structural system that was both flexible and extremely strong. Even after the upper sections of the monument disappeared, the core foundation remained intact. The eventual disappearance of the arch itself presents another historical puzzle. By the late Roman period, much of the visible structure had vanished. Archaeological evidence indicates that many of its stone blocks were removed and reused in the walls of the surrounding fortifications. Recycling building materials was common practice in antiquity, especially during periods of military instability when resources were scarce. However, the scale of the dismantling suggests that the arch must once have been an immense structure filled with valuable stone. The fact that almost none of the original superstructure survives today makes it difficult for historians to reconstruct exactly how the monument looked. Even in its ruined state, the Richborough Gateway continues to fascinate researchers. The surviving foundations provide rare physical evidence of Roman engineering practices on the distant edge of the empire. They demonstrate how imperial architectural traditions were transported from the heart of Rome to newly conquered territories thousands of kilometers away. At the same time, the structure reminds us that many aspects of Roman technology remain only partially understood. The durability of their construction materials aids to the logistical organization required for projects of such scale. And the symbolic intentions behind frontier monuments like Richborough all continue to provoke scholarly debate. Today, the quiet ruins of Richborough Roman fort contrast sharply with the monumental gateway that once dominated the landscape. What remains is a massive square platform, silent and weathered. Yet beneath this simple structure lies a story of Roman ambition, advanced engineering, and remarkably durable construction technologies. The Richborough Roman Gateway remains not only a relic of Roman Britain, but also a reminder that some ancient engineering achievements still hold mysteries that modern science has yet to fully explain. Where are you watching this video from? And what time of day is it for you? Share your location and time in the comments below. Across the fertile plains of the Ararat Valley, in modern-day Armenia, lie the quiet ruins of one of the most important cities of the early medieval Caucasus. Beneath layers of soil and fragmented stone stretches the archaeological landscape of ancient Divin, a city that once served as a royal capital, a commercial hub along major trade routes, and a central seat of the Armenian Church. Among the many structures uncovered within this vast urban complex, one monument continues to capture the attention of archaeologists and historians alike: the remains of the Divin Basilica complex. Today, only the foundations, fragments of walls, and scattered architectural elements survive. Yet these remnants reveal the outline of what was once an immense basilica built during the early centuries of Christianity in Armenia. What makes this structure particularly intriguing is not only its religious significance or monumental scale, but also the surprising level of technical skill visible in its construction. Certain architectural features, especially the precision of its stonework, suggest a level of engineering knowledge that still raises questions among modern researchers. Historical evidence indicates that the basilica was constructed sometime between the 4th and 5th centuries, a period of enormous transformation in Armenian history. Armenia had officially adopted Christianity in the year 301, becoming the first state in the world to declare Christianity as its official religion. In the decades that followed, monumental churches began to appear across the kingdom, symbolizing the consolidation of a new religious and political order. The basilica at Divin appears to have been one of the most ambitious of these early ecclesiastical projects. Archaeological excavations conducted throughout the 20th century revealed a large three-aisled basilica plan with rows of columns that once supported an expansive roof structure. The footprint of the building suggests a length of more than 60 meters, an impressive dimension for the period and region. Such scale implies not only significant resources, but also a highly organized construction effort capable of coordinating large numbers of craftsmen, materials, and architectural planning. However, the most striking and enigmatic feature of the Divin Basilica complex lies in the stonework itself. Among the surviving fragments are numerous blocks that once formed the walls, column bases, and structural supports of the church. These stones display a level of cutting precision that is remarkable for a construction project of the early medieval period. Many of the blocks are squared with extraordinary accuracy, their surfaces flattened and aligned so precisely that adjacent stones fit tightly together with minimal mortar between them. In some cases, the joints are so narrow that even modern observers find it difficult to insert a thin blade between the stones. Such tight masonry suggests that the builders placed enormous importance on exact measurements and careful finishing of each block before it was assembled into the structure. The materials used in the basilica add further complexity to the puzzle, and many of the blocks are made from basalt and other volcanic stones common in the Armenian highlands, materials known for their hardness and resistance to weathering. Working such stone typically requires strong metal tools and considerable effort. Yet the surfaces of several blocks display smooth planes and consistent chisel patterns that indicate controlled and deliberate shaping rather than rough quarrying. When archaeologists examined these surfaces closely, they observed tool marks that appear surprisingly uniform, implying that the craftsmen responsible for the stone cutting possessed both advanced tools and refined techniques for shaping hard rock. How exactly these stones were prepared remains a topic of ongoing debate. Some researchers believe that highly skilled stonemasons using iron chisels and hammering techniques could have achieved this level of precision through careful manual labor. Others suggest that the craftsmen may have employed specialized stoneworking methods that are poorly documented in surviving historical records. Unlike later medieval cathedrals of Europe, where detailed architectural manuals sometimes survived, the construction practices of early Armenian basilicas remain largely undocumented. As a result, the technical knowledge that enabled the precise cutting of these blocks is mostly inferred from the stones themselves. Yet the basilica's scale is only one part of the mystery. The terrain of the Divan site itself presents a challenge for large stone structures. The ancient city was built on a plain, composed largely of soft alluvial soils deposited by nearby rivers. Normally, this kind of ground is unstable for heavy buildings, particularly those made of stone masonry. However, excavations show that the builders of the basilica employed a remarkably sophisticated foundation system. Layers of large basalt blocks were carefully arranged at the base, above which smaller stones and gravel were packed to distribute weight across the surface. Binding these layers together was a durable mortar mixture that appears to have been specially prepared to resist moisture and structural shifting. This multi-layered foundation technique allowed the enormous building to stand securely, despite the relatively soft ground beneath it. For archaeologists studying ancient engineering practices in the Caucasus, the system suggests a deep, empirical understanding of soil stability and load distribution, knowledge that must have been developed through generations of building experience. Another intriguing aspect of the masonry is the way the blocks appear to have been arranged to reinforce structural stability. In several parts of the foundation and wall bases, stones were interlocked in patterns that distributed stress evenly across the structure. Rather than stacking blocks vertically in simple layers, the builders sometimes offset joints or inserted longer stones that extended deeper into the wall. This technique would have strengthened the structure against both settling and seismic vibrations. Considering that the region around Divin has experienced numerous earthquakes throughout its history, such structural foresight may have played an important role in the building's longevity. Indeed, the survival of the basilica's foundations through centuries of seismic activity is itself a remarkable fact. Historical sources record devastating earthquakes affecting the city, including a major event in the late 9th century that reportedly destroyed large sections of Divin. Yet even after such disasters, substantial portions of the basilica's lower structures remained intact. The resilience of these foundations suggests that the engineering principles applied during construction were highly effective. The careful stone cutting, tight masonry joints, and layered foundation system likely worked together to create a building capable of absorbing and redistributing structural stresses. Beyond the purely technical aspects, the basilica also reflects the cultural and political ambitions of early Christian Armenia. As the capital of the kingdom during several historical periods, Divin served not only as a center of administration, but also as a focal point of religious authority. Large ecclesiastical buildings, such as this basilica, would have symbolized the power and permanence of the newly established Christian state. The precision of the stonework may therefore have been more than a practical choice. It could also have been a deliberate demonstration of craftsmanship meant to express spiritual and political prestige. Despite decades of excavation, many questions about the Divin Basilica complex remain unanswered. Archaeologists continue studying its stones, foundations, and architectural fragments to better understand how the structure was built. Yet the extraordinary precision of the basalt blocks, cut and assembled with remarkable accuracy, remains one of the site's greatest mysteries. These stones suggest that ancient Armenian builders possessed technical knowledge that modern researchers are still trying to fully understand. What do you think allowed ancient builders to cut and fit such hard basalt stones with such astonishing precision? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden beneath the quiet countryside of Kent in southeastern Britain lies one of the most intriguing archaeological discoveries connected to the late Roman world in Britain, the shrine room of the Lullingstone Roman Villa. At first glance, the site appears to be just another rural Roman villa, one of many elite residences built across the provinces of the Roman Empire during the first centuries CE. Yet deep inside the structure, archaeologists uncovered a small upstairs chamber whose walls preserve faint but unmistakable traces of religious imagery. This modest room has become one of the most debated spaces in Romano-British archaeology because it appears to represent an early Christian shrine created inside a private Roman home. More remarkably, the walls of this chamber preserve evidence of a sophisticated fresco technique, whose durability and craftsmanship continue to surprise modern researchers. Although the room itself is small, the combination of religious symbolism, architectural adaptation, and advanced wall painting technology has turned the Lullingstone Shrine Room into an important window into the cultural and technological world of late Roman Britain. The villa itself was first systematically excavated in the mid-20th century after local discoveries revealed fragments of Roman walls and artifacts buried beneath farmland. As archaeologists began uncovering the structure, they realized that the building had undergone several phases of occupation and renovation across the Roman period. Initially constructed during the 1st century CE, the villa gradually expanded into a luxurious country residence complete with mosaic floors, bath complexes, and richly decorated rooms. But it was during the later centuries of Roman rule, likely in the 4th century, that one of the upper rooms was transformed into a space with clear religious significance. When excavators reached the plaster fragments covering the walls of this room, they discovered painted symbols and figures unlike anything previously identified in Roman villas in Britain. Among the surviving motifs were representations of the Chi symbol, an early monogram associated with Christ, as well as painted human figures shown in a posture of prayer known as the Oran's pose, a gesture commonly found in early Christian art across the Mediterranean world. The presence of these symbols strongly suggests that the room functioned as a small Christian shrine or house church, possibly used by members of the villa's household during a period when Christianity was spreading throughout the Roman Empire but had not yet fully transformed provincial society. Yet the religious interpretation of the room is only one part of its fascination. Equally compelling is the extraordinary craftsmanship of the wall paintings themselves. The surviving images were created using the Roman technique known as fresco painting, in which pigments are applied directly onto freshly laid lime plaster while it is still wet. This method requires remarkable precision and coordination because the artist must complete each section of the painting before the plaster surface dries. Once the plaster hardens, the pigment becomes chemically bound to the wall, creating a surface that can endure for centuries. The fresco fragments from the Lullingstone Shrine Room demonstrate that the painters working in this villa possessed an advanced understanding of this technique. Multiple layers of plaster were carefully applied to create a smooth painting surface, beginning with a coarse base layer designed to adhere firmly to the masonry wall. On top of this base, craftsmen added progressively finer layers of lime plaster, each smoothed and prepared before the final painting surface was applied. Only when the final layer was still damp would the artists begin applying mineral pigments to create the decorative imagery. What makes this particularly remarkable is how well the colors and lines survived despite nearly 16 centuries buried underground. Even today, archaeologists can identify strong contrasts between red, yellow, black, and white pigments across the fragments. These colors were likely derived from naturally occurring minerals: iron oxides for reds and yellows, carbon for black, and lime-based compounds for lighter tones. However, the exact mixture of pigments and plaster used in the shrine room remains a subject of ongoing investigation. In many Roman sites across Europe, frescoes have faded dramatically or lost large sections of their painted surfaces due to moisture, soil chemistry, and structural collapse. At Lullingstone, however, significant portions of the imagery retained their clarity even after the villa had been abandoned and the building eventually collapsed. This unexpected durability has led researchers to consider whether the craftsmen responsible for the shrine room used particularly refined plaster mixtures or construction techniques not fully understood today. One possible explanation involves the layering system used in Roman wall preparation. Ancient builders frequently mixed crushed brick dust or volcanic ash, materials sometimes referred to as pozzolanic additives, into lime plaster in order to increase strength and resistance to moisture. Such mixtures could create a harder surface, capable of bonding more effectively with pigments. If a similar method was used in the shrine room, it may explain why the painted surfaces remained adhered to the walls even after centuries of burial beneath debris. Yet confirming this theory has proven difficult because the surviving plaster fragments are small and heavily weathered, leaving only limited chemical evidence to analyze. This uncertainty leaves open the possibility that the artisans working at Lullingstone possessed specialized knowledge of plaster preparation that has not yet been fully reconstructed by modern archaeological science. Another intriguing detail concerns the artistic style of the frescoes themselves. Although the surviving figures are fragmentary, their proportions and brushwork suggest that the painters were trained in artistic traditions circulating across the wider Roman world. The depiction of praying figures resembles motifs found in early Christian art from regions such as North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. This raises an important question. Were the artists local craftsmen experimenting with new religious imagery, or were they itinerant painters who had traveled across the empire bringing established artistic methods with them. The presence of such sophisticated fresco work in a rural villa in Britain hints at the possibility that artistic knowledge could spread remarkably far through the networks of Roman trade and culture. Yet there is still no definitive evidence identifying who painted the shrine room or how they acquired the technical expertise required to execute such work. And the shrine room also reveals how architecture and belief could merge within the domestic spaces of the late Roman world. Rather than constructing a separate church building, the inhabitants of the villa appear to have adapted an existing room within their residence to serve a sacred purpose. This transformation may reflect the social realities of early Christian communities, many of which practiced their faith within private houses before the construction of dedicated churches became common. The careful decoration of the room with symbolic imagery suggests that its users intended it to function as a focal point for devotion or prayer. At the same time, the technical sophistication of the wall paintings indicates that considerable resources were invested in creating an environment worthy of religious use. In the end, the shrine room of Lullingstone Roman Villa stands at the intersection of art, technology, and cultural transformation. It reflects a moment when Christianity was gradually becoming an important force in the Roman world, while traditional Roman building and painting techniques were still widely practiced. The frescoes in the room clearly illustrate this transition. They were created using classical Roman artistic methods, yet display symbols associated with a new religion. Even after decades of research, many questions remain unanswered, including the exact function of the room, the identity of the artists who painted it, and the precise composition of the plaster and pigments that allowed the artwork to survive for so long. For this reason, the small chamber is not merely an archaeological remain, but also a rare piece of evidence showing how technology, craftsmanship, and religious belief intersected during a major period of change in the Roman Empire. Could the Roman craftsmen have used a special material technique that allowed these frescoes to survive for more than 16 centuries? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Across the cold waters of Lake Mälaren in present-day Sweden lies the island of Björkö, home to one of the most important Viking-age archaeological sites ever discovered, the ancient trading center of Birka. Flourishing between the 8th and 10th centuries, Birka stood at the crossroads of long-distance trade networks that linked Scandinavia with the Baltic, the Byzantine world, and even the distant markets of the Islamic caliphates. Yet beyond its role as a commercial hub, Birka has become famous for something else entirely: the remarkable burial grounds that surround the settlement. Among thousands of graves scattered across the landscape, a particular group known as the Birka Chamber Graves has drawn intense attention from archaeologists. These graves are not simple pits in the earth. Instead, they are carefully constructed underground burial chambers that resemble small wooden rooms built beneath the surface. Their architecture, the deliberate arrangement of objects within them, and the extraordinary artifacts discovered inside have transformed these graves into one of the most intriguing windows into the technological and cultural world of the Vikings. The construction of the chamber graves themselves reveals a level of engineering sophistication that continues to surprise researchers. To create these burials, Viking builders first excavated deep rectangular pits into the soil. Within these pits, they assembled wooden chambers using thick beams and planks, forming walls, floors, and sometimes even roof structures. The result was essentially a subterranean wooden room capable of supporting the surrounding earth. This method required careful planning. The builders needed to understand how to prevent the walls from collapsing during construction, and how to distribute weight once the chamber was sealed beneath the ground. Although the wood has mostly decayed after more than 1,000 years, archaeologists have reconstructed the layout through soil stains and surviving fragments. These reconstructions show that many chambers were built with striking precision, suggesting the existence of experienced craftsmen who specialized in burial architecture. Yet despite decades of study, the exact techniques used to stabilize these underground structures remain uncertain. There are no surviving Viking texts describing the process, leaving scholars to infer the methods from archaeological traces alone. Inside the chambers, the organization of objects reveals another layer of deliberate design. Bodies were often placed on wooden platforms or benches along one side of the chamber, positioned as if resting in a room rather than lying in a grave. Around them were arranged weapons, tools, jewelry, and everyday objects that appear carefully positioned rather than randomly deposited. Shields might lean against a wall. Spears could be placed parallel to the body. Horses were sometimes buried beside their riders in adjoining spaces within the chamber. In several graves, gaming boards used for the strategic game known as Hnefatafl were discovered near the deceased, suggesting a symbolic connection between warfare, leadership, and intellectual strategy. The consistent placement of these items hints at ritual practices and possibly standardized funerary traditions within Viking society. Yet the symbolic meaning behind these arrangements remains partly mysterious. Were the chambers meant to replicate the household of the dead, or were they designed to represent status and power in a form that could be recognized by the living? Among all the discoveries at Birka, however, one category of artifact stands out as particularly revealing: the metal weapons and tools found within the chamber graves. These objects demonstrate a level of metallurgical expertise that challenges older assumptions about Viking technology. Many swords recovered from Birka display evidence of advanced forging techniques, including the method known as pattern welding. In this process, blacksmiths twisted and welded together multiple iron rods with different carbon contents to create blades that were both flexible and strong. When polished, the metal produced subtle wave-like patterns along the surface of the blade, a visual signature of highly skilled craftsmanship. Achieving such results required precise control of temperature within the forge and a deep understanding of how different metals behaved when heated and hammered together. Even by the standards of medieval metallurgy, these blades represent exceptional workmanship. The quality of these weapons suggests that Viking blacksmiths were not merely practical craftsmen, but masters of a sophisticated technological tradition. Metallurgical analysis has revealed that some blades were composed of layered steels with varying hardness, allowing the edge to remain sharp while the core retained flexibility. This balance prevented swords from shattering during combat, a critical advantage in battle. The process of producing such blades would have required multiple heating cycles, repeated hammering, and careful quenching in water or oil to achieve the correct structural properties. In some cases, the hilts of the swords were decorated with silver inlays or intricate geometric patterns, further demonstrating the artistic dimension of Viking metalworking. Spears and axes discovered in the chamber graves show similar technical refinement. Spearheads were often forged with reinforced sockets designed to hold wooden shafts securely while withstanding the shock of impact. Axes ranged from heavy battle weapons to smaller, finely balanced tools that could serve both martial and practical purposes. The consistent quality of these metal objects indicates the presence of highly trained specialists working within Viking communities. It also suggests access to reliable sources of iron ore and charcoal, as well as organized production methods capable of supporting both everyday needs and elite weapon manufacture. Another fascinating aspect of the Birka chamber graves is the evidence that Viking metallurgy was deeply connected to international trade networks. Some sword blades discovered at Birka bear inscriptions or marks associated with workshops in continental Europe, implying that finished blades were imported and then mounted with locally crafted hilts. And other weapons appear to have been forged entirely within Scandinavia, using techniques that may have spread through cultural exchange. The presence of silver coins from the Abbasid Caliphate and silk textiles from Central Asia in the same graves reinforces the idea that Birka existed within a vast web of economic connections stretching thousands of kilometers. Through these networks, raw materials, finished goods, and technological knowledge could circulate between distant civilizations. One of the most famous graves at Birka, known as BJ 581, has further complicated the story. Discovered in the 19th century, this burial contained a complete set of weapons, including a sword, arrows, shields, and 2 horses, objects that archaeologists initially interpreted as the possessions of a high-ranking male warrior. Yet genetic testing conducted in the 21st century revealed that the skeleton in the grave belonged to a woman. This unexpected discovery sparked intense debate about gender roles in Viking society. Was she a warrior herself, or did the weapons symbolize status rather than military participation? Whatever the answer, the grave demonstrates that the technological objects found in Birka's chamber burials were deeply intertwined with social identity and cultural symbolism. Today, the Birka chamber graves remain one of the most important archaeological sources for understanding the Viking Age. They reveal a society capable of building complex burial architecture, organizing sophisticated rituals, and producing metal weapons with remarkably advanced technical skill. At the center of these discoveries lies the achievement of Viking metallurgy, a craft that combined engineering knowledge, skilled craftsmanship, and long-distance trade connections. However, even after more than a century of research, many questions remain unanswered. How did the Vikings acquire such advanced metallurgical knowledge? Were their sword-forging techniques developed independently, or were they influenced by other civilizations? And how were these valuable weapons distributed among Viking warriors and leaders? The graves at Birka do not offer simple answers. Instead, they preserve quiet traces of creativity and technological capability from a Viking civilization that may have been far more advanced than once imagined. Do you think the advanced Viking metallurgical technology discovered at Birka was developed independently, or did the Vikings learn it from other civilizations through ancient trade networks? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden among the low hills of eastern India, the Ratnagiri Buddhist complex stands as one of the most intriguing archaeological sites connected to the intellectual and spiritual world of ancient Buddhism. Located in the modern Indian state of Odisha, Ratnagiri once formed part of a powerful network of Buddhist learning centers that flourished between the 5th and 13th centuries. Together with the nearby monastic sites of Lalitgiri Buddhist Complex and Udayagiri Buddhist Complex, Ratnagiri created a regional landscape of scholarship, ritual, and architectural experimentation that rivaled some of the most famous Buddhist universities of the ancient world, including Nalanda Mahavihara and Vikramashila University. Yet despite decades of excavation and study, Ratnagiri continues to puzzle archaeologists and historians, and not only because of its historical importance, but also because of the remarkable technological achievements hidden within its ruins. At first glance, the site appears as a complex arrangement of red brick structures scattered across a gentle hillside. These remains include massive monastic courtyards, shrines, gateways, and a dense landscape of stupas of various sizes. When archaeologists began systematic excavations during the 20th century, they quickly realized that Ratnagiri had once been a large Mahavihara, or Buddhist monastic university, designed to support hundreds of monks engaged in study, meditation, and ritual. The architectural layout reveals a level of planning that was far from accidental. Monastic cells were arranged in precise rows around large central courtyards and forming rectangular complexes that created both functional living spaces and symbolic spiritual centers. Corridors connected these rooms in a logical network that allowed monks to move easily between teaching halls, meditation chambers, and communal spaces. The uniform dimensions of the cells suggest standardized planning methods, implying that ancient builders used careful measurement systems to maintain architectural harmony across the entire complex. However, beyond its symmetrical layout and sophisticated urban planning, the most astonishing technological feature of Ratnagiri lies in the material that holds the entire complex together: its brick construction. Nearly every major structure at the site, including monasteries, shrines, gateways, and stupas, was built primarily from carefully manufactured red bricks. At first, this may not appear unusual, since brick was widely used across the Indian subcontinent in antiquity. Yet the bricks of Ratnagiri reveal something extraordinary. Even after more than 14 centuries of exposure to monsoon rains, intense humidity, temperature fluctuations, and natural erosion, large portions of the original walls remain standing. Many bricks still retain their sharp edges, and entire structural foundations remain stable despite the absence of modern reinforcement. Researchers studying the site have noticed that the bricks used at Ratnagiri were produced with remarkable consistency. Their dimensions are highly standardized, indicating that ancient builders followed strict production guidelines. Now, this level of uniformity would have required well-organized workshops capable of producing thousands of bricks with identical proportions. Equally impressive is the quality of the firing process. Archaeological analysis shows that these bricks were fired at carefully controlled temperatures, creating a dense, durable ceramic structure that resists moisture infiltration. Unlike poorly fired bricks that crumble under prolonged exposure to water, the Ratnagiri bricks demonstrate an unusual resistance to weathering, suggesting that ancient craftsmen possessed a deep understanding of clay composition and kiln technology. Even more mysterious is the binding material used between the bricks. The mortar that holds many of the walls together has proven surprisingly resilient. While some sections have eroded over time, other portions remain tightly bonded, maintaining the structural integrity of walls that have stood for centuries. Chemical studies of similar ancient mortars across the region have revealed complex mixtures of lime, organic additives, and mineral aggregates, but the exact formulas used at Ratnagiri are still not fully understood. Some scholars believe that local builders may have experimented with specialized mixtures designed to resist the region's heavy monsoon climate. If true, this would indicate a sophisticated level of materials science long before the development of modern engineering chemistry. The durability of Ratnagiri's brick technology becomes even more remarkable when considering the environmental conditions of eastern India. The region experiences intense seasonal rains that can quickly weaken poorly constructed buildings. Flooding, soil movement, and vegetation growth can also accelerate structural decay. Yet despite these challenges, Ratnagiri's brick foundations have survived for more than a millennium. The endurance of these materials raises important questions about ancient construction knowledge. Did the builders possess advanced techniques for selecting and processing clay? Were their kilns capable of achieving temperatures more consistent than previously assumed? Or did they develop architectural strategies that distributed structural stress more efficiently across brick surfaces? Beyond the engineering of its walls, Ratnagiri also displays extraordinary artistic craftsmanship. The entrance gateways of the monasteries were decorated with finely carved stone sculptures depicting Buddhist deities, bodhisattvas, and mythological guardians. These carvings demonstrate a high level of artistic sophistication and are often associated with the development of Vajrayana Buddhism, a later form of Buddhist practice that incorporated complex symbolic imagery and ritual traditions. Numerous statues discovered at the site represent figures such as Tara and other tantric deities, suggesting that Ratnagiri may have been an important center for Vajrayana scholarship during the early medieval period. These sculptures, combined with the architectural layout of the site, indicate that Ratnagiri was not only a place of study, but also a dynamic religious center where ritual, art, and philosophy intersected. Now, another striking feature of the complex is the extraordinary number of stupas scattered throughout the site. Surrounding the main monastery are hundreds of smaller votive stupas constructed over many generations. Some of these were built directly on top of earlier structures, forming layered architectural histories that reflect centuries of devotional activity. Archaeologists believe these stupas may have been constructed by monks, pilgrims, or patrons as offerings or commemorations. Their variety in size and style suggests that Ratnagiri remained active for a long period, gradually expanding as new structures were added to the sacred landscape. Yet perhaps the greatest mystery surrounding Ratnagiri lies in its sudden decline. For several centuries, the complex thrived as a center of Buddhist learning and ritual. Then, and sometime around the 13th century, activity at the site appears to have faded rapidly. Historical records provide few clues about exactly what happened. Some scholars link the decline to the broader disappearance of Buddhism from much of the Indian subcontinent during the medieval period. Others suggest that political instability, changing trade routes, or regional conflicts may have disrupted the monastic communities that sustained the complex. Whatever the cause, Ratnagiri eventually fell silent, its monasteries abandoned and gradually reclaimed by the surrounding landscape. Today, the ruins of the Ratnagiri Buddhist complex remain a clear testament to the technological skill and knowledge of ancient Buddhist civilization. Now, beneath the quiet hills of Odisha lies a sophisticated architectural system built from thousands of precisely crafted bricks, many of which have survived for more than 1,000 years, despite the harsh climate of South Asia. Their remarkable durability continues to fascinate archaeologists and engineers, suggesting that ancient builders may have possessed construction techniques that we still do not fully understand. In this sense, the bricks of Ratnagiri are not merely building materials. They are silent witnesses to a lost chapter of ancient engineering knowledge. What do you think allowed the bricks of the Ratnagiri Buddhist complex to survive for more than 1,000 years in such a harsh monsoon climate? Was it a lost ancient material formula, or is it possible that we still do not fully understand the construction technology of the past? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Across the plains of eastern Serbia, near the Danube River, lie the ruins of the ancient Roman city of Viminacium. Once an important military and administrative center of the Roman Empire, the city served as the base of the legion Legio VII Claudia and developed into one of the largest urban settlements in the region. Today, the site is best known for its enormous necropolis, containing tens of thousands of graves spread across the surrounding landscape. Within this vast burial ground, archaeologists discovered the Viminacium Mausoleum complex, a group of monumental tomb structures whose architecture and mysterious occupants continue to intrigue researchers. Systematic excavations began in the 20th century and gradually revealed the true scale of the necropolis. Thousands of graves, from simple cremations to elaborate stone tombs, were uncovered beneath nearly 2,000 years of accumulated soil. Among them were several large mausoleums built from carefully arranged brick and stone. Their impressive size suggests they were created for individuals of very high status. As Viminacium functioned both as a legionary fortress and a provincial capital, these tombs may have belonged to governors, elite military officers, or wealthy aristocratic families connected to the Roman administration. What makes the complex especially fascinating is the remarkable durability of its construction. Even after nearly 2,000 years of exposure to environmental change, many structural elements of the mausoleums remain astonishingly stable. The walls were built using the classic Roman combination of fired brick and lime-based mortar, materials that formed a cohesive structure capable of resisting moisture, shifting soil, and seasonal temperature fluctuations. Archaeological analysis of the mortar has revealed mineral compositions similar to those found in Roman concrete used in monumental architecture throughout the empire. This material technology, which allowed Roman builders to create structures of extraordinary longevity, remains only partially understood today. Modern experiments attempting to replicate ancient Roman mortars often fail to achieve the same long-term durability observed in archaeological remains. At Viminacium, the preserved walls of the mausoleum complex demonstrate just how effective this ancient engineering could be, and yet the architectural strength of the complex is only part of the story. The arrangement of the mausoleums within the necropolis appears to follow a deliberate spatial plan. Several of the larger tombs are aligned along subtle axes that run through the burial landscape, suggesting that Roman surveyors carefully measured and organized the layout before construction began. Orientation toward the east appears in multiple tomb chambers, a feature that may reflect symbolic connections to the rising sun and the concept of rebirth in the afterlife. Although Roman funerary traditions were diverse, such alignments hint at deeper cosmological ideas embedded in the design of the burial complex. Whether these orientations were purely symbolic or connected to specific ritual practices remains uncertain, but they reveal that the necropolis was far more than a random collection of graves. Perhaps the most captivating aspect of the Viminacium mausoleum complex, however, lies inside the tomb chambers themselves. Within several of these structures, archaeologists uncovered remarkably preserved wall paintings and decorative interior surfaces, offering a rare glimpse into the artistic environment of Roman funerary spaces. These frescoes were applied to carefully prepared plaster layers that once covered the interior walls of the mausoleums. Despite centuries of burial beneath the earth, fragments of these painted surfaces have survived with surprising clarity. Reds, ochres, deep blacks, and traces of blue pigments still appear across the plaster, forming geometric frames, symbolic motifs, and ornamental patterns that once transformed the tomb interiors into vibrant ceremonial spaces. The presence of such elaborate decoration inside burial chambers raises important questions about the intentions of those who commissioned them. In Roman culture, tombs often functioned not only as resting places for the dead, but also as sites of memory where families could perform rituals honoring their ancestors. The painted walls at Viminacium suggest that the interior environment of the mausoleums was designed to create a meaningful visual experience for visitors. Decorative panels may have framed the sarcophagus or burial niche, guiding the viewer's attention toward the central resting place of the deceased. The colors themselves likely held symbolic meaning, representing themes such as eternity, protection, or divine association. Yet the exact iconographic program of these murals remains difficult to reconstruct because many sections of the paintings have survived only in fragments. What continues to intrigue researchers is the technical sophistication of the painting methods used within the mausoleums. Roman fresco technique involved applying pigments onto freshly laid plaster so that the colors would chemically bond with the surface as it dried. This process required precise timing and a deep understanding of materials. If the plaster dried too quickly, the pigments would fail to bind properly. If the surface remained too wet, the colors could blur or run. The artists who decorated the tombs at Viminacium clearly possessed the expertise necessary to execute this demanding technique. A microscopic analysis of the surviving paint layers has revealed multiple stages of preparation, including coarse plaster foundations followed by fine finishing layers that created a smooth painting surface. Such careful preparation suggests that skilled artisans, possibly trained in urban workshops, were responsible for the decoration. Equally mysterious is the origin of the pigments themselves. Some of the colors found within the mausoleums appear to have been derived from mineral sources that were not locally available. Red pigments may have come from iron-rich ochres, while darker tones might have been produced using carbon-based materials. Traces of blue or green pigments are particularly intriguing, as these colors often required specialized mineral compounds or imported materials. If such pigments were indeed used at Viminacium, it would indicate that the city was connected to broader trade networks capable of supplying artistic materials across large distances within the Roman Empire. The presence of these pigments in funerary contexts suggests that considerable resources were invested in decorating the tombs of the deceased. Inside some of the mausoleums, archaeologists also discovered objects associated with burial rituals. Oil lamps, ceramic vessels, fragments of jewelry, and small bronze figurines were found near the burial chambers, hinting at ceremonies that may have taken place during funerary rites or later commemorative gatherings. In Roman tradition, offerings were often placed in tombs to accompany the dead into the afterlife. Lamps symbolized eternal light, while vessels could contain food, drink, or incense used during ritual observances. Here, the combination of decorated walls and ritual objects implies that the mausoleums were intended to serve as ceremonial environments rather than simple storage spaces for human remains. Another layer of mystery surrounds the individuals buried within these elaborate tombs. Although skeletal remains have been discovered in some chambers, inscriptions identifying the occupants are rare or entirely absent. Without clear epigraphic evidence, archaeologists must rely on indirect clues, such as the scale of the tombs, the richness of their decoration, and associated artifacts, to infer the status of the deceased. Given Viminacium's role as a major military and administrative hub, it is plausible that some of these mausoleums belonged to prominent officials or commanders stationed at the city. Others may have been wealthy civilians whose fortunes were tied to the economic activity generated by the legionary fortress and the nearby Danube trade routes. Today, the Viminacium Mausoleum Complex stands as one of the most important archaeological discoveries for understanding the funerary culture of Rome's frontier provinces. Beneath the quiet fields of Serbia, layers of frescoes, durable brick walls, and carefully arranged burial chambers continue to reveal the technical skill and symbolic thinking of the ancient Romans. Yet many questions remain unanswered. Who were the individuals buried here? What rituals took place within these tomb chambers? And where did the artisans learn the techniques that created such long-lasting frescoes? Excavations at Viminacium are still ongoing, and each new discovery brings researchers closer to unraveling the remaining mysteries of the past. If the frescoes inside the tombs at Viminacium have preserved their colors for nearly 2,000 years, what kind of special techniques or materials do you think the Romans might have used to achieve such remarkable durability? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Near the windswept frontier of northern Roman Britain, not far from the massive defensive line of Hadrian's Wall, archaeologists working at the Roman fort of Vindolanda uncovered a discovery that quietly transformed the study of ancient history. Buried beneath layers of mud and collapsed timber were hundreds of thin wooden sheets no larger than modern postcards. At first glance, they appeared to be nothing more than fragments of decayed wood. Yet as conservators began to examine them more closely, faint traces of ink began to emerge across their surfaces. These fragile objects, now known as the Vindolanda writing tablets, would eventually reveal one of the most extraordinary archives of everyday life from the Roman world. Dating primarily to the late 1st and early 2nd centuries CE, these tablets contain letters, supply lists, in military reports, and personal messages written nearly 2,000 years ago along the remote northern frontier of the Roman Empire. But beyond their historical content lies something even more intriguing: the sophisticated, yet still partly mysterious technology used to create them. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of the Vindolanda tablets is the writing method itself. In the Roman world, the most common writing medium for everyday communication was the wax tablet. These consisted of wooden frames filled with a thin layer of wax, into which letters were scratched using a stylus. Wax tablets were reusable and durable, making them ideal for administrative work. Ink writing, by contrast, was normally reserved for papyrus documents or parchment scrolls used in more formal contexts. And yet the tablets discovered at Vindolanda reveal an entirely different practice, one that is both rare and technologically intriguing. Instead of wax, these tablets were made from extremely thin sheets of wood, often cut from birch, alder, or oak. Many are only 1 to 3 millimeters thick, closer to the thickness of modern cardstock than typical wood panels. Their surfaces were carefully smoothed, folded like small diptychs, and then written on using ink and a pen. In effect, the Romans stationed at this frontier fort were using something remarkably similar to wooden paper. The precision required to create such writing surfaces raises several technological questions that scholars still debate. Raw wood is an uneven and porous material. Ink applied directly to untreated wood tends to bleed, spread unpredictably, and/or soak into the fibers until the text becomes illegible. Yet the Vindolanda tablets display neat, controlled lines of writing, often executed in rapid cursive Latin script. This suggests that the surfaces were prepared using a specialized process to stabilize the wood and create a suitable writing layer. Some researchers believe the wood may have been carefully scraped and burnished to close the grain, producing a smooth surface capable of holding ink. Others propose that the tablets may have been treated with organic compounds, perhaps oils, resins, or thin coatings, though definitive evidence remains elusive. The exact preparation method has never been fully reconstructed, and this small technological mystery continues to fascinate archaeologists and materials scientists alike. Equally intriguing is the ink itself. Analysis suggests that the ink used on the tablets was a form of carbon-based ink, likely produced by mixing soot or finely ground charcoal with water and a binding agent such as gum arabic. At first glance, this formula appears simple, yet its effectiveness is remarkable. The ink adhered to the prepared wooden surfaces with surprising stability, producing clear, dark lettering that could be read even centuries later. In many cases, the writing is so finely executed that individual strokes of the pen remain visible under magnification. This level of clarity indicates that the writers were not only literate, but also accustomed to writing quickly and confidently using ink pens, tools typically associated with more formal documents elsewhere in the Roman world. Another extraordinary aspect of the Vindolanda tablets is the unusual environment that preserved them. Normally, organic materials such as wood decay rapidly in soil due to oxygen, microorganisms, and fluctuating moisture levels. At Vindolanda, however, the tablets were buried in layers of waterlogged clay and organic debris, creating a low-oxygen environment that dramatically slowed decomposition. This anaerobic condition effectively sealed the tablets in a natural conservation chamber beneath the fort. As a result, hundreds of fragile wooden documents survived, where similar materials at other Roman sites would have vanished entirely. Even so, many tablets appeared blank when first excavated. The ink had faded into the wood fibers over time, rendering the text invisible to the naked eye. The recovery of these lost writings became possible only with the help of modern imaging technology. By using infrared photography, researchers discovered that the carbon ink absorbed infrared light differently from the surrounding wood. Under infrared imaging, faint traces of letters suddenly became visible, revealing entire texts hidden within seemingly empty tablets. This technological breakthrough allowed historians to decipher hundreds of messages that had been silent for nearly 2 millennia. What those messages reveal is a vivid portrait of life along the Roman frontier. Far from being a distant military outpost isolated from civilization, Vindolanda appears to have been a bustling community filled with soldiers, families, merchants, and administrators. The tablets include inventory lists of food supplies and requests for warm clothing, administrative reports, and personal letters exchanged between officers and their households. One of the most famous examples is a birthday invitation written by Claudia Severa to the wife of a Roman commander, often considered the earliest surviving example of Latin writing by a woman. Such documents demonstrate that written communication was not limited to official bureaucracy. It was woven into the everyday social fabric of the fort. The scale of the discovery is also remarkable. Archaeologists have uncovered more than 1,600 tablets, and excavations at Vindolanda continue to produce new examples. Because the fort was rebuilt multiple times over several centuries, each occupational layer may contain additional archives waiting to be discovered. This means that the Vindolanda tablets represent not only a technological curiosity, but also one of the richest surviving collections of Roman handwritten documents anywhere in the world. Yet despite decades of study, several questions remain unresolved. Why did the inhabitants of Vindolanda rely so heavily on this unusual method of ink writing on thin wooden sheets rather than traditional wax tablets? Was this technique widely used across the Roman Empire but rarely preserved? Or was it a localized adaptation developed specifically for frontier conditions? And what exact processes allowed these delicate wooden documents to function so effectively as writing surfaces? The answers remain incomplete, leaving the Vindolanda tablets as both a historical treasure and a technological puzzle. In the end, these modest fragments of wood reveal something profound about the Roman world. They show that even on the distant edge of the empire, far from the marble cities of the Mediterranean, people were writing letters, managing logistics, and maintaining personal relationships through written communication. The Vindolanda tablets remind us that history is not preserved only in grand monuments or imperial inscriptions. Sometimes the most revealing traces of the past survive in the smallest artifacts, thin sheets of wood carrying lines of ink that have endured across 2,000 years of silence. Why do you think the Romans at Vindolanda used ink writing on thin wooden tablets instead of the more common wax tablets of their time? Could this have been a special technology developed specifically for the frontier of the empire? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. The stone causeway leading to Clickerman is one of the most intriguing architectural features of this Iron Age complex in the Shetland Islands of northern Scotland. Located on a small island in the middle of Clickerman Loch, the broch itself already represents a remarkable example of ancient defensive architecture. Yet long before reaching the circular tower and its surrounding settlement, anyone approaching the site would first encounter a narrow stone path stretching across the water. This path, known today as the Clickerman Broch Causeway, formed the only practical route connecting the island fortress to the mainland. At first glance, it appears to be a simple stone roadway, but closer examination reveals that it was carefully engineered to serve both defensive and structural purposes. In many ways, the causeway functioned as the gateway to the entire settlement, forcing anyone entering the Broch complex to cross a narrow corridor exposed to observation and control. Water surrounding the island acted as a natural moat, while the causeway created a single choke point where movement could be monitored or restricted. This strategic arrangement meant that defenders occupying the broch or the surrounding walls would have had a clear advantage over anyone attempting to approach from the mainland. Yet beyond its defensive significance, the most fascinating aspect of the Clickerman Broch Causeway lies in the remarkable engineering techniques used to construct and stabilize a stone roadway directly within a water environment. And building a durable structure across the soft sediments of a loch presents serious challenges, even with modern tools, and the Iron Age builders responsible for the causeway had none of the technologies typically associated with large-scale water construction. There was no mortar binding the stones together, no metal reinforcement, and no heavy machinery capable of stabilizing foundations beneath the water. Instead, the builders relied entirely on dry stone engineering, a method that depends on careful placement and weight distribution rather than chemical bonding. Despite these limitations, the causeway has remained stable for more than 2,000 years, suggesting that its construction involved a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of structural balance and environmental conditions. And archaeological studies indicate that the causeway was likely constructed through a layered process designed to distribute weight evenly across the unstable lakebed. Rather than simply dropping stones into the water, the builders appear to have created a foundation composed of large base stones placed directly on the sediment. These heavy blocks would have acted as anchors, spreading the structure's weight across a wider area of the soft ground beneath the loch. Once this base layer was established, smaller stones and gravel were gradually added to fill the gaps between the larger blocks. This combination of large and small materials formed a compact, interlocking mass that helped stabilize the pathway and reduce the risk of individual stones shifting or sinking. The technique resembles what modern engineers might describe as a load distribution system, where pressure is spread across many points rather than concentrated in a few areas. By layering stones in this way, the builders effectively created a primitive but highly effective foundation capable of supporting the causeway above the water. The remarkable durability of the structure suggests that the Iron Age builders possessed a deep, practical understanding of how stone behaves in wet environments. In shallow lakes like Clickerman Loch, The ground beneath the water is typically composed of mud, silt, and organic sediment that can easily shift under pressure. Without proper weight distribution, heavy stones would quickly sink or become unstable. The fact that the causeway has remained largely intact for millennia indicates that its builders knew how to counteract this problem. By selecting stones of appropriate size and shape and arranging them in layered formations, they created a roadway that could settle gradually into the sediment while maintaining overall structural stability. Over time, the stones would have compacted the mud beneath them, forming a more solid base that further strengthened the pathway. Another intriguing question concerns the actual process of constructing the causeway in the water. Moving and positioning large stones in a shallow lock would have required significant effort and coordination. One possibility is that construction took place during periods when water levels were lower, thus exposing more of the lakebed and making it easier for workers to place stones directly onto the sediment. Alternatively, the builders may have worked progressively from the shoreline outward, extending the stone foundation step by step while standing on the partially completed structure. Each new layer of stones would have reinforced the path, allowing workers to move further into the water as construction continued. Although direct archaeological evidence of these construction methods remains limited, the physical layout of the causeway suggests that the builders were capable of carefully controlling the placement and stability of the stones throughout the process. Material selection also likely played an important role in the longevity of the causeway. The Shetland Islands provide abundant sources of durable local stone, yes, particularly sandstone that fractures into relatively flat slabs. These natural shapes are ideal for dry stone construction because they can be stacked securely without the need for mortar. By choosing stones that interlocked naturally, the builders created a structure that could resist movement caused by water flow, seasonal temperature changes, and sediment shifting. Over centuries, environmental factors such as wave action, biological growth, and gradual sediment accumulation would have altered the surrounding landscape, yet the causeway has continued to survive as a recognizable feature of the site. This endurance highlights the effectiveness of the original engineering approach. Beyond its technical achievements, the causeway also played an important role in shaping how people experienced the Broch itself. Approaching the island required crossing the narrow stone path, leaving the mainland behind, and moving gradually across the water toward the fortified settlement. This transition may have had symbolic as well as practical significance. In many ancient cultures, crossing water marked the passage into a protected or sacred space. Whether intentionally symbolic or purely functional, the design of the Clicaman settlement creates a powerful sense of entering a controlled and separate environment. The causeway acts as a threshold between the outer world and the defended interior of the Broch complex. Archaeological evidence further suggests that the causeway may not have remained unchanged throughout the life of the settlement. Variations in stone arrangement indicate that sections of the pathway may have been repaired, reinforced, and/or expanded over time. Such modifications would imply that the structure remained an active and essential part of the settlement's infrastructure for generations. Maintaining the causeway would have required continuous knowledge of the techniques originally used to stabilize it, suggesting that the engineering principles behind its construction were well understood within the community. Today, the Clicaman Broch Causeway remains one of the most remarkable examples of Iron Age engineering in northern Britain. What appears to be a simple stone path is actually a carefully constructed structure capable of enduring centuries of environmental pressure. Built using only stone and practical knowledge of the landscape, Its layered foundation distributes weight across the soft lake bed, allowing the causeway to remain stable for over 2,000 years. Although archaeologists understand parts of its design, the exact construction methods used by its builders are still uncertain, leaving the causeway as a lasting mystery of ancient engineering. How do you think Iron Age builders managed to construct a stable stone causeway in water that has survived for more than 2,000 years? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Mangup Kale Plateau city stands as one of the most mysterious fortified settlements of the medieval Black Sea world. Located in the mountains of southwestern Crimea, the city occupies the top of a massive limestone plateau rising nearly 600 meters above the surrounding valleys. From a distance, the plateau appears like a natural fortress. Steep cliffs fall away on most sides, creating a defensive barrier that would have been extraordinarily difficult for any army to overcome. For centuries, this isolated highland stronghold served as the political and cultural center of a small but influential medieval state known as the Principality of Theodoro. Today, only ruins remain scattered across the windswept plateau. Yet the archaeological traces that survive suggest that Mangup Kale was once a thriving urban center whose architecture, its engineering and strategic design reveal a level of sophistication that continues to intrigue historians and archaeologists. The geographical setting of Mangup Kale is central to understanding its historical importance. The plateau itself stretches across roughly 90 hectares and is naturally protected by dramatic limestone escarpments that drop sharply into forested valleys below. Only a few narrow ridges provide access to the summit, and these were carefully fortified by the inhabitants with defensive walls and gates. This combination of natural geology and human engineering created a nearly impregnable citadel. Medieval chronicles describe the fortress as one of the strongest in the region, capable of resisting prolonged sieges. Thus, archaeological evidence suggests that multiple defensive walls once controlled the approaches to the plateau, forcing any attacker to pass through a series of narrow corridors before reaching the city itself. Such careful use of terrain demonstrates a deep understanding of military architecture and defensive planning. Yet the most remarkable feature of Mangup Kale is not merely its defensive walls or its elevated position. Instead, the true architectural wonder of the site lies carved directly into the cliffs themselves. Across the edges of the plateau, hundreds of chambers have been cut into the limestone rock, forming what scholars often describe as a vast cave city. These rock-cut spaces represent one of the most distinctive and mysterious elements of Mangup Kale. Unlike natural caves, the chambers were intentionally excavated by human hands, and many display a level of precision and organization that reveals advanced stoneworking techniques. The caves vary greatly in size and function. Some are small, simple rooms that may once have served as storage spaces or shelters. Others form complex multi-room structures connected by corridors and stairways carved directly into the rock. In several places, entire tiers of chambers appear stacked along the cliff faces, creating the impression of a vertical settlement embedded within the mountain itself. Windows and openings cut into the cliff walls overlook the valleys below, allowing light and air to reach the interior spaces. Certain chambers contain benches, niches, or carved recesses that suggest specific uses, possibly for domestic life, storage, and into religious activities. Archaeologists believe that many of these caves functioned as part of a sophisticated urban infrastructure rather than as isolated shelters. Some may have served as granaries designed to protect food supplies from weather and enemies. Others appear to have been used as workshops, stables, or defensive observation posts. In a few locations, researchers have identified rock-cut staircases and narrow passages that may have acted as secret access routes along the cliffs. These hidden pathways could have allowed residents or soldiers to move unseen around the edges of the plateau, an invaluable advantage during times of conflict. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of these cave structures is the level of technical skill required to create them. The limestone is relatively workable compared with harder stone, yet carving hundreds of rooms into sheer cliff faces would still have required enormous labor and careful planning. The interior walls of many chambers are surprisingly straight, and corners often form nearly right angles, indicating that the builders used systematic cutting methods rather than rough excavation. Tool marks preserved on the stones suggest repeated chiseling and smoothing, though the exact tools and techniques used by the medieval builders remain a subject of debate among researchers. The purpose of constructing such an extensive network of rock-cut spaces also raises intriguing questions. Some scholars argue that the caves provided a secure refuge during times of invasion, allowing inhabitants to retreat into the cliffs while maintaining access to storage and defensive positions. Others believe that the caves were integral parts of the city's everyday architecture, expanding the limited building space available on the plateau's surface. In either case, the caves transformed the natural cliffs into an extension of the urban landscape, blurring the boundary between the built environment and the geological formation itself. Water management was another crucial challenge for a city built atop a high plateau. The inhabitants of Mangup Kale appear to have developed an effective system of reservoirs and cisterns carved into the rock to collect and store rainwater. Channels cut into the stone surface directed rainfall into large storage basins, ensuring a reliable water supply even during periods of siege. This hydraulic infrastructure suggests careful planning and a deep understanding of the plateau's natural drainage patterns. Without such a system, the settlement could not have supported a permanent population. Religious life also left visible traces across the plateau. Several rock-cut churches and monastic spaces have been identified among the ruins, reflecting the Byzantine cultural influence that shaped the Principality of Theodoro. These sacred spaces often include carved apses, altar platforms, and niches for religious icons. Though many decorative elements have faded over time, the surviving architectural forms hint at the spiritual importance of the site and the integration of faith into the daily life of its inhabitants. The history of Mangup Kale reached a dramatic turning point in the late 15th century. In 1475, the expanding Ottoman Empire launched a campaign to capture the remaining independent strongholds of Crimea. Mangup Kale resisted fiercely, relying on its formidable natural defenses and fortified walls. Historical sources suggest that the siege lasted for months, with defenders attempting to hold out within the plateau fortress. Eventually, however, Ottoman forces succeeded in breaching the defenses, reportedly using powerful artillery to break through the walls. After the conquest, the city gradually declined, and over time, its population dispersed or relocated to other settlements in the region. Today, Mangup Kale remains an extraordinary archaeological landscape where geology and human history merge into a single dramatic setting. The windswept plateau still preserves the outlines of ancient walls and foundations of churches and scattered remnants of residential structures. But the most striking elements remain the silent caves carved into the cliffs, hundreds of chambers that once formed a hidden architectural world suspended above the valleys of Crimea. These rock-cut spaces continue to raise questions about the technological capabilities, daily life, and strategic thinking of the people who built them. Despite decades of research, many parts of the plateau remain unexplored, and it is possible that additional chambers, tunnels, and structures still lie concealed beneath layers of collapsed rock and soil. In this way, the Mangup Kale Plateau City stands not only as a monument of medieval engineering, but also as a reminder of how ancient communities adapted to extreme landscapes. But by transforming the cliffs themselves into homes, storage spaces, and defensive structures, the inhabitants created a unique form of architecture that remains one of the most remarkable examples of a cave-integrated city anywhere in the ancient and medieval world. Even today, as researchers continue to map and study the plateau, the carved chambers of Mangup Kale preserve an atmosphere of mystery, silent witnesses to a civilization that once thrived high above the valleys of Crimea. What do you think led Mangup Kale to become such a massive cave city? Was it a matter of survival, a military strategy, or evidence of an ancient construction technology that we still do not fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Along the northern shores of the Black Sea, on the Kerch Peninsula of present-day Crimea, lie the quiet ruins of an ancient harbor that once connected distant worlds. Known today as the Nymphaean Harbor Complex, this coastal installation formed the maritime heart of the ancient Greek city of Nymphaeon, a colony established around the 6th century BCE by settlers from the Ionian Greek world. At first glance, the site appears modest, scattered stones along a sloping coastline overlooking a calm inlet. Yet beneath this seemingly simple landscape lies a maritime system that once played a critical role in the trade networks of the northern Black Sea. Our archaeological research over the past century has revealed that Nymphaeon was not merely a provincial outpost, but a strategically positioned harbor capable of supporting large volumes of maritime commerce. Even more intriguing are the questions that remain unanswered. How ancient engineers selected such an ideal natural harbor, how its stone structures were built and maintained in a dynamic marine environment, and perhaps most mysteriously, why this once important port gradually disappeared from the historical stage. The geographic setting of Nymphaeon immediately explains part of its ancient importance. The harbor was situated in a naturally protected bay where the coastline bends inward, forming a sheltered inlet guarded by rocky outcrops and gentle slopes of land. In antiquity, this natural protection would have shielded ships from the powerful winds and waves that often sweep across the Black Sea. Ancient mariners valued such locations immensely because safe anchorage meant the difference between reliable trade and constant danger. Geological studies of the bay indicate that the seabed here offered a rare combination of stability and depth. Unlike many coastal zones that accumulate shifting sandbanks, the waters of Nymphaeon appear to have maintained a relatively consistent depth suitable for merchant vessels. This raises an intriguing possibility. The founders of the settlement may have possessed a surprisingly detailed understanding of local maritime conditions. Choosing such an ideal harbor location suggests that early Greek colonists carefully surveyed the coastline rather than selecting the site randomly. And archaeological excavations have revealed that the natural harbor was enhanced with human engineering. Remains of stone quay structures and possible breakwaters indicate that ancient builders modified the shoreline to create organized docking areas for ships. Large stone blocks were carefully arranged to stabilize the waterfront, forming platforms where cargo could be loaded and unloaded. The stones themselves show evidence of deliberate shaping and placement, suggesting that construction required planning and coordinated labor. Working in a coastal environment is notoriously difficult, even with modern technology. Yet the builders of Nymphaeon managed to establish durable structures along the edge of an active sea. These constructions likely served multiple purposes, and some segments may have functioned as protective barriers that reduced wave impact, while others formed docking points where ships could be tied securely. The arrangement implies that the harbor was designed to support regular commercial traffic rather than occasional visits. Further evidence of organized maritime activity appears in the form of carved anchor holes and mooring points discovered along the stone installations. These features suggest that ships could be secured directly to the harbor infrastructure, allowing crews to stabilize their vessels during loading operations. Historical sources indicate that Nymphaeon played a significant role in exporting grain from the fertile steppe regions north of the Black Sea. Vast agricultural lands produced surplus grain that was transported by river and land routes to coastal ports, where it could then be shipped across the sea to Greek cities. Among the most important destinations was Athens, whose growing population depended heavily on imported grain. Nymphaeon therefore became part of a larger economic network, linking the northern frontier of the Greek world with the major urban centers of the Mediterranean. Yet the harbor complex still holds physical mysteries. Underwater surveys conducted in recent decades have identified submerged stone features near the ancient shoreline. Some of these structures appear to be remnants of harbor walls or docking platforms that are now partially buried beneath sediments. Their positions do not always correspond neatly with the present coastline, leading researchers to suspect that the ancient shoreline may have shifted over the centuries. Changes in sea level, coastal erosion, or sediment accumulation could have gradually altered the configuration of the harbor. If this is correct, the original port facilities may once have extended farther into the bay than they appear today. The underwater remains hint at a larger and more complex harbor system that has only partially survived the passage of time. Despite these impressive features, the greatest mystery surrounding the Nymphaeon harbor complex lies not in its construction, but in its disappearance. For centuries, the harbor functioned as an active node within the Bosporan kingdom, a powerful regional state that controlled trade routes around the Cimmerian Bosporus. Ships arrived with merchants, amphorae, grain cargo, and travelers moving between the Greek world and the vast interior of Eurasia. Archaeological layers confirm that the city prospered during this period, supported by maritime exchange and agricultural exports. But gradually, the rhythm of trade that sustained Nymphaeon began to weaken. By the later centuries of antiquity, signs of decline become increasingly visible in the archaeological record. Harbor installations appear to have fallen into disrepair, and fewer imported goods are found in the settlement layers. Historians have proposed several possible explanations for this transformation. One theory suggests that shifting trade routes reduced the strategic importance of the port. As political centers and economic networks changed, merchants may have begun favoring other coastal hubs that offered better protection or more direct connections to emerging markets. Another possibility involves environmental change, or if sediment gradually accumulated within the harbor basin, it could have reduced the depth of the water and made docking increasingly difficult for larger ships. Even small changes in water depth can transform a once reliable harbor into a risky anchorage. Political instability may also have played a role. The Bosporan kingdom experienced periods of internal conflict and external pressure from neighboring powers. Military disruptions often had immediate consequences for trade, especially in frontier regions where maritime commerce depended on security and stable governance. A port such as Nymphaeon, positioned along a critical maritime corridor, would have been particularly vulnerable to these shifts in political power. If regional authority weakened, merchants might have redirected their routes towards safer ports. Yet none of these explanations fully accounts for the gradual fading of the harbor from historical prominence. Unlike cities that were destroyed suddenly by war or natural disaster, Nymphaeon appears to have declined slowly, almost quietly. The harbor did not vanish overnight. Rather, its activity diminished generation by generation. Cargo shipments decreased, maintenance of harbor structures ceased, and eventually, the once busy docks fell silent. Over time, the sea and the land reclaimed the infrastructure that had supported centuries of maritime exchange. Today, the remnants of the Nymphaeon harbor complex lie scattered along the coastline, their stones weathered by wind and salt. What remains is only a fragment of the ancient system that once operated here, and yet these ruins preserve a powerful reminder of how interconnected the ancient world truly was. A harbor built by Greek colonists on the distant shores of the Black Sea could feed populations thousands of kilometers away and sustain economic relationships across continents. And still, the ultimate fate of this port remains an open question. Was its decline caused by environmental change, shifting trade networks, political instability, or a combination of all three? The evidence continues to invite investigation. In this sense, the silence of the harbor is itself part of the mystery. The stones of Nymphaeon reveal that ancient engineers understood their maritime environment well enough to construct a functional port in a remote frontier region. They built quays, organized docking systems, and integrated the harbor into a vast network of trade. But history rarely preserves the final chapter of such places. As the centuries passed, the ships stopped coming, the harbor installations eroded, and the once vital gateway of Nymphaeon slowly disappeared into the landscape, leaving behind only fragments of stone and a puzzle that archaeologists are still trying to solve. In your opinion, what truly caused Nymphaeon harbor to gradually disappear from history? Environmental changes, shifting trade routes, political instability, or perhaps another factor we have yet to uncover? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The ruins of the Nalanda Monastery Grid in the modern Indian state of Bihar represent one of the most remarkable archaeological landscapes of the ancient world. For nearly 7 centuries, Nalanda functioned as the intellectual heart of Buddhist scholarship across Asia. Students and scholars traveled thousands of kilometers from China, Korea, Tibet, and Southeast Asia to study philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and logic within its walls. Yet beyond its reputation as one of the earliest great universities in history, Nalanda also reveals something equally extraordinary: a highly organized architectural system built with an engineering precision that still surprises modern researchers. When archaeologists first began systematically excavating the site in the 19th and 20th centuries, they discovered that the entire complex followed an orderly layout that resembles a carefully designed grid. Long rows of monasteries stand aligned along a north-south axis, while temples and ritual structures rise on the eastern side of the complex. Each building appears positioned with deliberate planning, forming a coherent urban design rather than a settlement that grew randomly over centuries. From an aerial perspective, the layout looks almost modern. Rectangular monasteries repeat in sequence, each enclosing a central courtyard surrounded by rows of monks' cells. Passageways connect buildings in orderly lines, and walls maintain strikingly consistent orientations. As such organization raises intriguing questions about how ancient builders were able to maintain alignment and structural consistency across a large area without the surveying technologies used today. Scholars believe the complex developed gradually between the 5th and 12th centuries, yet the architectural rhythm remains remarkably consistent, suggesting that the planners of Nalanda may have worked from an early master plan that guided construction for generations. If this interpretation is correct, Nalanda represents not just a religious center, but one of the earliest known examples of long-term institutional urban planning in Asia. Within this grid of monasteries, daily life once revolved around teaching, debate, meditation, and the copying of manuscripts. Historical accounts, written by travelers such as the Chinese monk Xuanzang, describe a thriving intellectual community where thousands of students lived and studied. Monasteries functioned as both residences and classrooms. Their central courtyards allowed light and air to circulate, while providing a communal space for discussion and ritual practice. The architectural repetition across the site suggests that builders developed a standardized model for these monastic structures. Each complex followed a similar arrangement of rooms, corridors, staircases, and shrine spaces, demonstrating a level of architectural consistency rarely seen in ancient educational centers. Such uniformity hints at careful planning, disciplined construction methods, and a deep understanding of how architecture could support a community devoted to scholarship. Yet among all the remarkable features of Nalanda, one element stands out as particularly mysterious: the extraordinary durability of its brick construction. Unlike many monumental ancient sites built primarily from stone, Nalanda was constructed largely from fired clay bricks. At first glance, this might seem like a modest material compared with marble or granite. However, the survival of these structures after more than a millennium reveals an astonishing level of technical mastery in brick production and masonry techniques. Many of the monastery walls still rise several meters high, their red surfaces weathered but intact despite centuries of monsoon rains, seasonal flooding, and temperature fluctuations. Archaeologists examining the ruins have repeatedly noted how well the bricks have endured compared with other historical brick structures in South Asia. One reason for this resilience may lie in the quality and uniformity of the bricks themselves. Excavations show that the bricks used at Nalanda were manufactured with striking consistency in size and shape. Such standardization would have allowed builders to assemble walls with tight joints and stable structural geometry. The firing process also appears to have been carefully controlled. Well-fired bricks are harder, less porous, and far more resistant to water damage. The bricks at Nalanda display precisely these qualities, suggesting that ancient craftsmen possessed detailed knowledge of kiln temperatures and clay preparation. This raises an intriguing question. How did brickmakers of the time achieve such reliable firing conditions without the thermometers or industrial kilns used in modern brick production? Equally mysterious is the mortar that binds the bricks together. In many sections of the ruins, the mortar remains surprisingly strong even after centuries of exposure. Some researchers believe the builders may have used a mixture containing lime, clay, and organic additives that improve durability and flexibility. Similar formulas appear in other ancient constructions across Asia, yet the exact composition used at Nalanda remains uncertain. Chemical analyses have produced clues, but no definitive answer. If a specialized mortar mixture was indeed employed, it would indicate that the builders possessed advanced empirical knowledge of material chemistry, knowledge refined through generations of experimentation. The engineering logic behind the brickwork is also evident in the thickness of the monastery walls. Many walls were built wide enough to support multiple stories, and evidence suggests that some structures once rose several levels above the ground. Brick bonding patterns helped distribute weight evenly across the structure, preventing collapse even when parts of the building deteriorated. In some places, the brickwork forms arches or reinforced corners designed to strengthen the structure against stress. These details reveal a sophisticated understanding of load distribution and architectural stability. It is remarkable to think that such engineering solutions were developed in a monastic environment primarily dedicated to intellectual and spiritual pursuits. Another factor contributing to the durability of Nalanda's architecture may be its integration with water management systems. Archaeologists have identified drains, channels, and carefully sloped courtyards designed to control rainwater during the intense monsoon season. Effective drainage prevents water from accumulating around foundations, a common cause of structural failure in brick buildings. By incorporating drainage directly into the design of the monasteries, Nalanda's builders protected their structures from long-term erosion. This suggests that the architects understood not only materials but also environmental challenges. They anticipated how seasonal climate patterns would affect the buildings and designed the complex accordingly. Taken together, these elements, uniform bricks, durable mortar, carefully engineered wall structures, and integrated drainage, help explain why Nalanda's architecture has endured for so long. Yet they also deepen the mystery. The precise techniques used by the builders were rarely recorded in written texts, and much of the technological knowledge may have been transmitted orally among craftsmen. When the great university was destroyed during the late 12th century, many of these traditions likely disappeared with it. As a result, modern researchers must reconstruct the ancient methods indirectly through archaeological evidence. Each excavated wall or brick layer offers new clues, but many questions remain unanswered. The story of Nalanda eventually ended in tragedy. Historical sources recount that the complex was devastated during military invasions in the late 12th century, when large portions of the university were burned and abandoned. Over time, the once vibrant center of learning fell silent, and soil gradually buried the remains of its buildings. Yet the physical resilience of its brick architecture allowed the site to survive long enough to be rediscovered centuries later. Today, the ruins stretch across a vast landscape of red brick foundations, corridors, and courtyards, offering a glimpse into the scale of an institution that once shaped intellectual life across much of Asia. Standing among the ruins today, it becomes clear that Nalanda was more than a monastery and more than a university. It was also a demonstration of advanced architectural organization and material technology in the ancient world. The orderly grid of buildings reveals long-term planning, while the enduring brickwork testifies to a mastery of construction techniques that remain only partially understood. In this sense, the Nalanda monastery grid is not simply a relic of religious history. It is also a silent archive of ancient engineering knowledge. Even after centuries of study, the site continues to challenge historians and archaeologists, reminding us that the builders of the past often possessed skills and insights that modern science is still trying to fully explain. What do you think allowed the bricks of Nalanda to survive for more than 1,000 years under such harsh climate conditions? Was it simply ancient construction skill? Or could there be material secrets that modern science still does not fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Tel Tayanat Temple complex stands as one of the most intriguing archaeological discoveries from the Iron Age Near East. revealing a monumental religious and political center that once flourished in the fertile Amuk Valley of southern Anatolia. Today, the ruins lie quietly near the modern Turkish-Syrian border, but more than 2.5 millennia ago, this site was a thriving capital within the Syro-Hittite cultural world. Excavations conducted throughout the 20th and 21st centuries have uncovered the remains of large temples, ceremonial courtyards, gateways, and sculptural programs that together formed a sophisticated sacred landscape. While historians have been able to reconstruct much about the historical context of the city, many aspects of the engineering, artistic techniques, and symbolic architecture of the Tel Tainat temple complex still provoke unanswered questions. Among its many remarkable features, none are more striking than the enormous stone guardian statues that once stood at the entrances to the temple gates, silently watching over the sacred precinct. The temples of Tel Tainat were built according to architectural traditions known as the Bit Hilani style, a design that spread across parts of Syria and Anatolia during the early 1st millennium BCE. These structures were not simple shrines, but carefully planned ceremonial buildings with columned entrance halls, large interior chambers used for rituals, and adjoining spaces for priests and administrators. The layout suggests a highly organized religious system closely tied to royal authority. Through processional pathways likely guided worshippers through courtyards toward the temple entrance, where the architecture itself created a dramatic visual progression. Even today, archaeologists studying the foundations and stone alignments note the remarkable symmetry and planning involved in the layout of the complex. Achieving such geometric precision required advanced knowledge of measurement and construction techniques. Yet the exact tools and surveying methods used by Iron Age builders remain largely unknown. Along the lower walls of several temple buildings, archaeologists discovered orthostats, large stone slabs carved in relief and placed side by side to form decorative panels. These slabs depict rulers, deities, and mythological creatures, and they reveal an impressive mastery of stone carving. The surfaces are smooth and carefully shaped, the carved lines clean and deliberate, and the alignment between individual blocks surprisingly tight. Such craftsmanship implies both skilled artisans and a well-developed tradition of stoneworking. Scholars have suggested that the sculptors used iron chisels, abrasives such as sand, and careful polishing techniques to achieve these results. Yet the precision visible in many of the reliefs still raises questions about the methods used to shape and finish the stone. For a society operating with relatively simple tools, the level of refinement achieved in these carvings demonstrates a technical sophistication that continues to surprise modern researchers. Despite the impressive architecture and intricate reliefs, the most dramatic feature of the Tel Tainat temple complex appears at the temple gateways themselves. Here, archaeologists uncovered the remains of enormous stone statues that once stood as guardians at the entrance to the sacred buildings. These monumental figures were positioned so that anyone approaching the temple would pass directly between them, creating a powerful symbolic threshold between the ordinary world and the realm of the gods. Some statues represent royal figures in ceremonial poses, while others depict supernatural beings combining human and animal characteristics. Their scale alone is astonishing. Many of these sculptures weigh several tons and were carved from large blocks of stone. Yet they were placed with remarkable precision at the entrances of the temple structures. The presence of these massive guardian statues raises several technological and logistical mysteries. First is the question of quarrying. The stone used for these sculptures would have had to be extracted from nearby quarries, a process that required separating enormous blocks from bedrock without modern cutting tools. Ancient builders likely used a combination of chisels, wooden wedges, and water expansion techniques to crack the stone along natural fissures. Even so, the process of removing such large blocks while maintaining structural integrity would have demanded both experience and careful planning. Transporting the finished blocks to the temple site presents another puzzle. The Amuk Valley terrain is not entirely flat. Non-moving stones weighing multiple tons across the landscape would have required coordinated labor and mechanical ingenuity. Some scholars suggest that wooden sledges pulled by teams of workers may have been used, possibly assisted by rollers or lubricated tracks. Others propose that earthen ramps could have helped move the statues into position. However, direct archaeological evidence for these transport systems remains scarce. Without written descriptions or surviving equipment, the precise techniques used by the builders of Tel Tainat remain largely speculative. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Guardian statues is the accuracy with which they were positioned. Archaeological surveys indicate that these sculptures were aligned carefully with the temple entrances and architectural axes of the complex. This alignment suggests that their placement was not random decoration, but part of a deliberate symbolic design. In many ancient Near Eastern cultures, guardian figures were believed to protect sacred spaces and repel hostile spiritual forces. By placing colossal statues at the threshold of the temple, the builders of Tel Tainat created an imposing visual statement of divine authority and royal power. Visitors approaching the temple would have encountered these towering figures before entering the sanctuary, reinforcing the sacred atmosphere of the complex. Beyond their symbolic significance, the statues demonstrate an extraordinary level of artistic and engineering skill. Carving such large sculptures required careful planning from the earliest stages of production. The sculptor had to visualize the final form within the stone block, gradually removing material without causing fractures or structural weaknesses. Once carved, the statue needed to be transported intact and set upright at the entrance to the temple. Achieving this without cranes or metal lifting equipment would have required a sophisticated understanding of balance, leverage, and structural support. Wooden frames, ropes, ramps, and coordinated labor forces may all have played a role in raising the statues into place. The broader cultural context of Tel Tainat adds another layer of complexity to these achievements. The site sits at the crossroads of several ancient civilizations, including the Hittites, Aramaeans, and Assyrians. Artistic elements found in the temple complex reflect influences from all these traditions. The guardian statues themselves resemble protective figures seen in Hittite and Assyrian architecture, yet their style also incorporates local artistic features unique to the Syro-Anatolian region. This blending of cultural motifs suggests that Tel Tainat functioned as an important regional center where ideas, artistic traditions, and technological knowledge intersected. Eventually, however, the flourishing temple complex came to an abrupt end. Archaeological layers indicate that parts of the site were destroyed or abandoned during the expansion of the Assyrian Empire in the 8th century BCE. Some statues were broken or toppled, and evidence of burning has been found in several structures. Whether this destruction resulted from a violent conquest, internal upheaval, or gradual political transformation is still debated. What remains certain is that the once vibrant ceremonial center fell silent, its temples collapsing and its monumental sculptures buried beneath centuries of soil. Today, the Tel Tainat temple complex provides archaeologists with an important glimpse into the engineering abilities and artistic achievements of Iron Age societies. However, the site also shows that many aspects of ancient technology are still not fully understood. The colossal guardian statues at the temple gates are perhaps the clearest example of this mystery. Despite decades of research, the exact methods ancient builders used to quarry, transport, carve, and erect these massive stone statues have not been completely explained. The modern archaeological research and new technologies continue to be applied in the hope of revealing more clues about the craftsmen who once constructed this remarkable temple complex. In your opinion, how were ancient builders able to quarry, transport, and erect the massive stone guardian statues at the gates of Tel Tainat with such remarkable precision? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Rising from the rugged basalt cliffs of western India, the monument known today as the Ellora Kailasa, or the Kailasa Temple of Ellora, stands as one of the most astonishing achievements of ancient engineering and artistic vision. Located within the vast rock-cut complex of Ellora in Maharashtra, this temple is unlike almost any other structure on Earth. Instead of being assembled from blocks of stone, it was carved directly from a single, massive rock formation. Entire halls, towers, courtyards, stairways, and sculptural galleries were meticulously excavated from the mountain itself. The result is not merely a temple, but an entire architectural complex hewn from one continuous piece of stone. For archaeologists, historians, and engineers alike, the Ellora Kailasa represents a masterpiece that raises profound questions about the technical knowledge and organizational capacity of the civilization that created it. Most scholars believe the temple was commissioned during the 8th century under the rule of King Krishna I of the Rashtrakuta dynasty. Yet even with this historical framework, many aspects of its construction remain deeply mysterious. The builders did not create the temple in the conventional manner of ancient architecture, where structures are erected layer by layer from the ground upward. Instead, the Ellora Kailasa was carved from the top of the cliff downward. This approach required extraordinary planning. Once workers began cutting into the rock, there was little room for error, and a miscalculation in the layout of the temple or its supporting pillars could have compromised the entire structure. Despite this challenge, the temple's geometry, proportions, and spatial organization reveal a level of architectural foresight that continues to astonish modern researchers. The scale of the excavation itself is staggering. Archaeologists estimate that between 200,000 and 400,000 tons of basalt rock were removed to create the temple complex. Even using modern machinery, the removal of such a vast quantity of stone would be a significant undertaking. Yet the builders of Kailasa accomplished this task using only ancient tools and methods. Historical records suggest that the temple may have been completed within only a few decades. If those estimates are correct, the workforce would have had to remove massive amounts of stone every single day. This has led some scholars to question whether we fully understand the methods and organizational systems employed by the ancient craftsmen responsible for the project. Beyond its remarkable construction process, the architectural layout of the Ellora Kailasa is itself an extraordinary achievement. The temple complex includes a monumental central shrine dedicated to the Hindu god Shiva, surrounded by subsidiary shrines, pillared halls, gateways, courtyards, and towering sculptural facades. Massive stone elephants appear to support the base of the structure, giving the impression that the entire temple rests upon a procession of carved animals. Multi-story galleries overlook the central courtyard. And long corridors lined with pillars create a sense of rhythm and symmetry throughout the complex. What makes this arrangement even more astonishing is the fact that every column, stairway, and architectural element was carved from the same continuous rock formation. Yet perhaps the most breathtaking aspect of the Ellora Kailasa, and the feature that most clearly demonstrates the artistic brilliance of its creators, is the extraordinary quality of its sculptural decoration. The temple is covered with an immense program of carvings that transform the stone surfaces into a vast narrative landscape of myth, symbolism, and sacred storytelling. Walls, pillars, ceilings, and exterior facades are adorned with intricately detailed reliefs depicting scenes from Hindu mythology, particularly the epic traditions of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. These carvings are not merely decorative additions to the architecture. They are fully integrated into the design of the monument, forming a seamless fusion of sculpture and structure. The precision and depth of these carvings are remarkable. Many reliefs contain multiple layers of figures arranged in dynamic compositions that convey movement, emotion, and dramatic tension. Deities, warriors, celestial beings, and mythological creatures emerge from the stone with astonishing clarity. In some scenes, the sculptors created complex, overlapping figures that give the impression of depth, almost as if the stone itself were unfolding into 3 dimensions. The surfaces of the sculptures were carefully polished and shaped to capture subtle variations in light and shadow, allowing the images to appear vivid, even in the dim interior spaces of the temple. One of the most famous sculptural panels within the complex depicts the mythological episode of Ravana shaking Mount Kailash. In this dramatic scene, the powerful demon king Ravana attempts to lift the sacred mountain of Shiva, causing the entire cosmic landscape to tremble. The relief captures the intensity of the moment with extraordinary skill. Ravana's muscular form strains beneath the weight of the mountain, while the divine figures above remain poised in calm authority. The composition demonstrates a deep understanding of anatomy, movement, and narrative expression. What makes this achievement even more remarkable is that the sculptors were working directly into the living rock of the mountain. Each line and contour had to be carved with precision, whereas mistakes could not easily be corrected. Throughout the temple complex, similar masterpieces appear in countless variations. Pillars are wrapped in ornate patterns, and figures that spiral upward toward elaborately carved capitals. Walls contain vast storytelling panels in which entire mythological episodes unfold across the stone surface. Some carvings are so finely detailed that individual strands of hair, delicate jewelry, and intricate fabric patterns can still be recognized more than 1,000 years after their creation. The consistency of quality across such a vast number of sculptures suggests the presence of highly skilled workshops working under a unified, artistic vision. The mystery surrounding these carvings lies not only in their beauty, but also in the tools and techniques required to produce them. Basalt is an extremely hard volcanic rock, making it difficult to carve even with modern equipment. Yet the artisans of Ellora were able to shape it into smooth surfaces, sharp edges, and delicate ornamental details. Archaeologists have found limited evidence of the specific tools used, and while iron chisels were likely involved, the exact processes by which such refined surfaces were achieved remain a subject of debate. Another intriguing aspect of the Ellora Kailasa is the apparent harmony between engineering and artistic design. The sculptural program does not appear to have been added after the structure was completed. Instead, the carvings seem to have been planned from the very beginning, integrated into the architectural framework as the excavation progressed. This suggests that the builders possessed a comprehensive vision of the entire monument long before the first section of rock was removed. Such coordination between architecture and sculpture would have required careful planning, detailed measurements, and a highly organized workforce. Today, the Ellora Kailasa remains one of the most extraordinary monuments of the ancient world. Its massive scale, unique rock-cut construction, and remarkable artistic decoration continue to amaze visitors and scholars alike. Despite many archaeological studies, key questions remain unanswered. How did the builders carve such a complex structure from solid rock with such precision? How was the enormous workforce organized? And what techniques allowed artists to create such delicate carvings in extremely hard stone? These mysteries continue to deepen the fascination surrounding the monument. The Ellora Kailasa stands not only as a temple, but as a powerful symbol of the ingenuity and ambition of an ancient civilization that transformed an entire mountainside into a masterpiece of sacred architecture. How do you think ancient craftsmen were able to carve the entire Ellora Kailasa from a single massive rock with such incredible precision and detail? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. The Huashan Cliff Caves, located near the city of Huangshan in Anhui Province, China, represent one of the most enigmatic archaeological discoveries of the modern era. Unlike many famous ancient sites that have been studied for centuries, these caves remained largely unknown until 1999, when local exploration revealed a vast system of artificial caverns carved directly into the mountainside. What immediately astonished archaeologists was not only the scale of the caves, but also the extraordinary level of engineering required to create them. More than 30 large caves have been identified so far, and many researchers believe that additional chambers may still remain hidden within the mountain. Inside these spaces are enormous halls, towering ceilings reaching heights of 20 to 30 meters, stone bridges, staircases, and pillars and interconnected chambers that resemble the architectural layout of a subterranean palace complex. The fact that all of this was carved directly out of solid rock has raised profound questions about the capabilities of the civilization responsible for constructing them. Even more puzzling is the complete absence of historical documentation describing such a massive undertaking, despite the fact that Chinese historical records are among the most detailed and continuous in the ancient world. Among all the mysteries surrounding the Huashan Cliff Caves, one of the most striking is the astonishing stone carving technology visible throughout the interiors. Nearly every wall, ceiling, and pillar inside the caves bears a distinctive pattern of parallel chisel marks that cover the rock surfaces with remarkable consistency. These marks are not random or rough, as might be expected from simple excavation work. Instead, they form evenly spaced grooves that run across the stone like carefully arranged waves. In many chambers, the entire surface of the rock has been intentionally left, with these patterns intact, creating a textured appearance that seems almost decorative. Archaeologists have noted that the grooves maintain a consistent angle and spacing across vast areas of rock, suggesting that the workers who carved these caves used a highly controlled and systematic method of excavation. This level of precision implies not only skilled craftsmanship, but also a well-organized construction process guided by clear architectural planning. The patterns themselves raise additional questions about the tools and techniques used by the ancient builders. But carving such enormous volumes of stone would have required tools capable of repeatedly striking hard rock surfaces with great accuracy. Yet the surfaces inside the caves show surprisingly uniform results, indicating that the workers maintained steady angles and depths during excavation. Some researchers believe that specialized chisels or metal tools must have been used to achieve this effect, possibly made from iron or advanced bronze alloys available during certain periods of Chinese history. However, no actual tools associated with the construction of the caves have been discovered within the site. The absence of these artifacts leaves archaeologists uncertain about the exact technological methods employed. Even more intriguing is the possibility that the builders deliberately preserved the chisel patterns for aesthetic or symbolic reasons rather than smoothing the surfaces afterward. If this interpretation is correct, then the excavation process itself may have been designed not only to remove rock, but also to produce a distinctive visual texture across the interior spaces. The precision of the carving becomes even more impressive when considering the overall structure of the caves. Many of the chambers contain massive stone pillars that were not added separately, but instead were left standing as the surrounding rock was carved away. These pillars support the ceilings of enormous halls, demonstrating that the builders understood how to maintain structural stability while removing large volumes of stone. In several caves, even the ceilings slope at consistent angles, and the interior layouts appear to follow deliberate geometric arrangements. The combination of pillars, terraces, platforms, and staircases suggests that the caves were designed according to an architectural plan rather than carved randomly over time. Achieving such a design would have required careful coordination among workers and a sophisticated understanding of both rock stability and spatial organization. The builders had to remove massive amounts of stone while simultaneously preserving the precise shapes of walls and columns that would keep the caves from collapsing. Another aspect of this engineering mystery concerns the sheer quantity of stone that must have been extracted during construction. These estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of rock may have been removed to create the existing caves. This would correspond to tens or even hundreds of thousands of tons of stone. Yet despite extensive exploration of the surrounding landscape, archaeologists have not found large deposits of discarded rock that would normally result from such excavation. The disappearance of this material presents a logistical puzzle. If the stone was removed from the mountain, where was it transported and how was it moved? The transportation of such enormous quantities of rock would have required a substantial labor force and an organized system of removal, possibly involving boats along nearby rivers or large-scale hauling operations. However, no clear evidence of such infrastructure has been discovered. The internal architecture of the caves adds another layer of mystery. Some chambers contain stone bridges spanning pools of water, while others feature raised platforms that resemble stages or ceremonial spaces. Narrow passageways connect larger halls, creating a labyrinth-like arrangement that suggests the caves may have served a specific purpose beyond simple excavation. The careful positioning of pillars and walls also indicates that the builders possessed an advanced understanding of load distribution within rock formations. In several caves, the remaining columns are arranged in symmetrical patterns that appear almost architectural in style, reinforcing the impression that the caves were intentionally designed spaces rather than abandoned mining chambers. Despite the complexity of the structures, archaeologists have found almost no traces of everyday human activity within the caves. There are no cooking areas, no large accumulations of pottery fragments, and very few artifacts that would normally be associated with habitation. This absence of domestic evidence suggests that the caves were not used as ordinary dwellings. Instead, they may have served specialized functions such as storage facilities, ritual spaces, or defensive refuges. Some researchers have proposed that the caves could have been used as secret military warehouses during turbulent periods of Chinese history. Others believe they may have been ceremonial spaces connected to local religious practices. Yet none of these theories fully explains the enormous scale of the excavation or the remarkable effort invested in shaping the interior surfaces. The dating of the Huashan Cliff Caves remains another unresolved issue. Certain stylistic clues, particularly the appearance of the chisel marks and the architectural forms, have led some scholars to suggest that the caves might date back to the Han Dynasty roughly 2,000 years ago. During this period, China possessed advanced iron tools and large state-organized labor forces capable of undertaking major construction projects. However, if the caves truly originated during the Han era, it is difficult to explain why no surviving historical records mention their construction. Ancient Chinese chronicles often documented major engineering achievements in great detail, especially projects involving large numbers of workers or significant resources. The absence of any such description in historical texts has therefore deepened the mystery. Today, the Huashan Cliff Caves remain one of the most intriguing archaeological sites in China. Their enormous halls and distinctive chisel patterns reveal an impressive ancient engineering achievement whose origins are still uncertain. The precise grooves covering the cave walls suggest a highly organized workforce with advanced technical skill. Yet without historical records or clear archaeological evidence identifying the builders, the caves continue to stand as a lasting mystery, an immense project carved deep into the mountains whose purpose and creators have largely disappeared from history. If you lived in ancient times, what tools or techniques do you think people could have used to carve enormous structures like the Huashan Cliff Caves? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The ancient monument known as Fornox Passage Tomb stands quietly within the rolling countryside of Eastern Ireland, not far from the famous prehistoric complex of Newgrange and Noath in the Boyne Valley. Built during the Neolithic period, around 5,000 years ago, this passage tomb belongs to the same remarkable tradition of megalithic architecture that spread across Ireland and parts of Atlantic Europe. Yet despite its relatively modest size, compared with its more famous neighbors, Fornox contains one of the most intriguing collections of prehistoric stone art ever discovered. The carvings inside the chamber, spirals, concentric circles, arcs, zigzags, and geometric patterns cover many of the interior stones with a density and sophistication that continues to puzzle archaeologists. These engravings were created long before the invention of metal tools in the region, meaning that the artists responsible for them were working with nothing more than stone implements, patience, and an understanding of form that appears surprisingly advanced. The presence of such a large quantity of carved decoration inside the tomb immediately raises questions about its purpose. Passage tombs across Ireland often contain symbolic art, but the concentration of motifs at Fornox is unusually high. Several stones in the central chamber display carefully composed patterns that appear almost deliberate in their symmetry. Spirals curl outward in smooth arcs, while circular forms intersect with linear grooves to create rhythmic geometric compositions. And some researchers believe that these designs were not merely decorative, but symbolic, perhaps reflecting cosmological ideas, seasonal cycles, or spiritual beliefs associated with burial rituals. Others argue that the carvings may represent abstract expressions of movement or transformation, concepts that were meaningful within Neolithic belief systems, but difficult for modern scholars to interpret. Whatever their meaning, the artwork clearly played a significant role in the tomb's interior environment, transforming the stone chamber into a symbolic space rather than a purely functional burial site. Among all the mysteries surrounding the art of fornox, however, one question stands out above the rest. How were these carvings executed with such remarkable precision? The technical skill visible in many of the engravings is extraordinary when considered within the technological limitations of the Neolithic period. Several spirals exhibit nearly perfect curvature, with the spacing between successive lines remaining consistent across the entire design. In some cases, the grooves appear so regular that they almost resemble shapes drawn using a compass or measuring device. Yet there is no evidence that the builders of fornox possessed such instruments. Archaeological discoveries from the period indicate that most carving would have been done using hard stone tools such as hammerstones or pointed chisels made from flint or other durable materials. Creating smooth, continuous curves in solid stone using such tools would have required immense control and planning. This technical precision has led researchers to speculate about the methods the Neolithic artists may have used to guide their work. One possibility is that they employed simple measuring techniques involving cords or marked sticks to maintain consistent proportions. By anchoring a cord at a central point and rotating it outward, they might have been able to outline spiral forms before carving them into the stone surface. Another theory suggests that the designs were first lightly sketched using pigment or scratching marks, which were then gradually deepened through repeated hammering and pecking. However, direct evidence for these preparatory methods has never been found within the tomb itself. As a result, the exact process behind the remarkably consistent geometry of the carvings remains uncertain. What is clear is that the artisans responsible for the work possessed a highly developed sense of spatial awareness and manual control. Equally intriguing is the environment in which the carvings were created. The decorated stones are located inside a chamber that receives little to no natural light. In order to carve these intricate patterns, Neolithic craftsmen would have had to work in near darkness, relying on firelight from torches or primitive lamps fueled by animal fat. Such lighting conditions would have produced flickering shadows across the stone surfaces, making it difficult to maintain accuracy while carving. Yet despite these limitations, the engravings appear deliberate and controlled rather than irregular or hurried. This suggests that the creators may have spent long periods carefully shaping each motif, perhaps returning repeatedly to the same stone until the desired form was achieved. The patience and dedication required for such work hint at a cultural context in which the act of carving itself may have held ritual significance. Another intriguing feature of the fornox carvings is the way they interact with light and shadow. When illumination strikes the engraved grooves at an angle, the designs become dramatically more visible as shadows deepen the lines. Some researchers believe this effect may have been intentional. The artists might have understood that shallow grooves would catch and amplify the glow of torchlight, causing the patterns to appear animated as flames flickered within the chamber. If this interpretation is correct, the carvings were not simply static decorations, but dynamic visual elements designed to transform the interior of the tomb during ritual gatherings. The swirling spirals and intersecting arcs would have seemed to shift and move in the dancing light, perhaps reinforcing symbolic narratives connected with life, death, and renewal. Despite decades of archaeological study, the meaning of these designs remains elusive. Unlike later historical cultures, Neolithic societies left no written records to explain the symbolism behind their art. Scholars can analyze patterns, compare them with carvings found at other passage tombs, and propose interpretations based on ethnographic parallels, but certainty remains out of reach. Some see the spirals as representations of celestial cycles, echoing the broader astronomical awareness demonstrated by monuments in the Boyne Valley region. Others interpret them as expressions of spiritual journeys, perhaps symbolizing transitions between the worlds of the living and the dead. There is also the possibility that the motifs carried multiple layers of meaning, combining cosmological concepts with local traditions and ritual practices. What makes the art of Fornox particularly compelling is that it embodies both artistic creativity and technical sophistication within a prehistoric context. The builders of this tomb were not simply stacking stones to create a burial chamber. They were deliberately shaping an interior space filled with symbolic imagery carved into the very fabric of the monument. Each spiral, groove, and geometric pattern reflects hours, perhaps days, of concentrated labor performed with simple tools and limited resources. Yet the final result displays a level of precision that challenges modern assumptions about the capabilities of Neolithic craftsmen. More than 5,000 years after its construction, the passage tomb of Fornox Passage Tomb still inspires curiosity and debate. Its carvings remain silent evidence of a culture whose knowledge and artistic skill we are only beginning to understand. The remarkable precision of the spiral engravings continues to raise questions about the tools, techniques, and intentions of the people who created them. Although archaeology has revealed much about the structure of the monument, the deeper meaning behind its carved stones remains largely unknown. And if Neolithic people really only had simple stone tools, how do you think they managed to carve such incredibly precise spirals inside Fornox Passage Tomb? Share your theory in the comments below. The layout of Vikramashila University remains one of the most intriguing architectural achievements of the early medieval Buddhist world. Established in the late 8th century by the Pala Emperor Dharmapala, the university quickly became one of the greatest centers of Buddhist scholarship in Asia, rivaling the influence of institutions such as Nalanda University. Yet while its intellectual legacy is widely recognized, the physical design of the university itself continues to fascinate archaeologists. Excavations conducted in the modern Indian state of Bihar have revealed that Vikramashila was not simply a collection of religious buildings constructed gradually over time. Instead, it appears to have been conceived as a carefully planned architectural complex whose geometric precision and functional organization suggest a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of spatial design, construction logistics, and educational infrastructure. At the center of the complex stands a massive cruciform temple structure built of baked brick. This monumental shrine dominates the entire layout, forming the symbolic and spatial heart of the university. Surrounding it is a vast, square monastic enclosure whose boundaries define the main academic and residential zone of the institution. The geometry of the complex is striking. When viewed from above, the ruins reveal an almost perfectly symmetrical plan, aligned with the cardinal directions. 4 major entrances appear to have opened toward the north, south, east, and west, guiding movement through the complex along clearly defined axes. Such alignment was not uncommon in sacred architecture across ancient India, but the precision with which the Vikramashila complex maintains this symmetry across hundreds of meters suggests deliberate planning at a scale rarely documented for educational institutions of the time. Within this enclosure, archaeologists have identified the remains of more than 200 monastic cells arranged in a continuous rectangular grid around the central courtyard. These cells once housed monks, scholars, and students, who traveled from across the Buddhist world to study philosophy, ritual practice, grammar, logic, and esoteric traditions. What makes this arrangement remarkable is not merely the number of rooms, but the astonishing regularity of their construction. The cells appear to follow nearly identical dimensions and are linked together by an interconnected network of corridors that runs along the inner perimeter of the monastery. These corridors form one of the most fascinating and technologically intriguing aspects of the entire complex. Far from being simple passageways, they appear to have functioned as the structural backbone of the university's daily life, connecting residential areas, teaching spaces, and ceremonial zones into a coherent architectural system. The corridor network reveals an extraordinary level of spatial optimization. Each monastic cell opens directly onto the corridor, allowing individuals to move efficiently between their living quarters and the central courtyard. This arrangement would have enabled large numbers of monks to circulate without congestion, thus an important consideration in a community that may have hosted hundreds of residents at its peak. The corridors themselves appear to have been constructed with consistent widths and carefully maintained linear alignment, creating a grid-like circulation system that resembles the organized layout of modern institutional campuses. In many ancient monastic sites, residential cells were built incrementally as communities expanded, resulting in irregular pathways and uneven spacing. Vikramashila, by contrast, displays a uniformity that suggests the entire residential system was designed simultaneously according to a master architectural plan. This level of uniformity raises intriguing technological questions. Maintaining consistent dimensions across hundreds of rooms and corridors would have required accurate measurement techniques and standardized construction practices. Yet the builders of Vikramashila worked more than 1,000 years before the introduction of modern surveying tools. Archaeologists have therefore speculated that ancient engineers may have relied on sophisticated rope-based measurement systems, modular brick units, or geometric layout methods derived from traditional architectural treatises. However, no surviving construction manuals from the Pala period explicitly describe the methods used in the creation of Vikramashila. As a result, the exact process by which this vast corridor network was designed and implemented remains uncertain. And equally fascinating is the functional efficiency that this system appears to have provided. The central courtyard, enclosed by the corridor grid, would have served as a communal gathering space where debates, teachings, and religious ceremonies could take place. From any monastic cell, a resident could reach the courtyard quickly through the corridor system, ensuring that daily academic activities remain tightly integrated with the residential life of the monastery. In effect, the corridors transformed the entire complex into an organized intellectual environment where movement, communication, and access to shared spaces were carefully orchestrated through architectural design. Another aspect that continues to intrigue historians is the possibility that some of the corridor spaces functioned as informal teaching areas. The proximity of the corridors to the residential cells and the central courtyard suggests that discussions and instruction could easily take place along these passageways. In this sense, the corridor system may have served as an architectural framework for the intellectual life of the university, allowing conversations, debates, and mentoring relationships to occur naturally throughout the complex. The structural techniques used to construct these corridors also demonstrate remarkable durability. Vikramashila was built primarily from fired brick rather than stone, yet large portions of the corridor foundations and walls have survived centuries of erosion and environmental exposure. Archaeological analysis shows that the bricks used in the construction of the complex were produced with striking uniformity, and both in size and firing quality. The consistent dimensions of these bricks may have played a crucial role in maintaining the straight lines and balanced proportions of the corridor grid. Furthermore, the bonding patterns used in the masonry appear to have distributed structural loads evenly across the walls, allowing the corridors to remain stable despite the passage of time. Beyond their practical role, the corridors may also have held symbolic significance within the spiritual landscape of the university. In many Buddhist monastic traditions, architectural pathways were designed to guide the movement of practitioners through spaces associated with learning, meditation, and ritual. The carefully organized circulation routes of Vikramasila may therefore reflect not only engineering efficiency, but also a philosophical vision of how knowledge and spiritual discipline should flow through the community. The design also demonstrates a remarkable awareness of environmental considerations. By surrounding the courtyard with continuous corridors and rooms, the architects may have created a microclimate that moderated temperature and wind within the interior of the complex. In the hot climate of Bihar, shaded corridors would have provided comfortable spaces for walking, studying, or gathering, while protecting residents from direct sunlight. Such environmental adaptation reflects a sophisticated understanding of how architecture could enhance both comfort and functionality. Overall, the layout of Vikramasila University reveals an impressive combination of geometry, engineering, and academic planning. The symmetry of the entire complex, the massive central temple, and the precisely organized residential quarters all suggest the existence of a carefully calculated master design. In particular, the network of corridors and classrooms stands out as the most remarkable technological feature, transforming the monastery into a highly organized academic environment. However, many questions remain unanswered. Who were the architects behind this ambitious design? What surveying techniques allowed them to achieve such precision? And how engineers of the Pala Empire managed to construct such a vast system of corridors and rooms? Until new discoveries emerge, the layout of Vikramasila continues to stand as a remarkable testament to the ingenuity of medieval Indian architecture. How do you think the ancient architects of Vikramasila University were able to design and construct such a remarkably precise system of corridors and classrooms more than 1,000 years ago? What surveying methods or planning techniques might they have used that we still do not fully understand today? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. The fortress of Otrar Oasis Citadel once stood at the heart of one of the most important cities along the ancient Silk Road. Located near the banks of the Syr River in what is now southern Kazakhstan, Otrar developed into a thriving oasis settlement that connected the cultures, merchants, and empires of Eurasia. For centuries, caravans traveling between China, Persia, and the Middle East passed through this strategic crossroads. At the center of the city rose the citadel, a fortified stronghold that symbolized both political authority and military power. Even today, the ruins of this fortress dominate the archaeological landscape of Otrar, forming a massive earthen platform surrounded by the remains of ancient defensive walls. Yet despite decades of excavation and historical study, the fortress and the city around it continue to raise profound questions about ancient engineering, urban survival in harsh environments, and the mysterious disappearance of a once flourishing metropolis. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Otrar citadel is the sheer scale of the city that once surrounded it. Archaeological surveys reveal that Otrar was not a small desert settlement, but a vast oasis city that may have covered hundreds of hectares at its peak. The citadel itself occupied the highest point of the settlement, functioning as the administrative and defensive core of the entire urban complex. From this elevated position, rulers could oversee both the inner city and the surrounding agricultural lands that sustained the population. Such an arrangement was not accidental. Across Central Asia, citadels were often built on raised platforms to enhance defense and visibility, but the scale of Otrar's central fortress suggests a city of considerable importance. What puzzles historians, however, is how such a large population managed to survive for centuries in an environment that appears, at first glance, hostile to permanent urban life. The answer seems to lie in the ingenious water management systems developed by the inhabitants of the oasis. Otrar existed because of the complex network of irrigation canals that diverted water from the Sirdaria and distributed it across the surrounding plains. These canals allowed agriculture to flourish in a region otherwise dominated by steppe and semi-desert conditions. Crops grown in the irrigated fields sustained the city's residents and supplied caravans traveling along the Silk Road. Yet the exact scale and organization of this irrigation network remain partly unknown. Many canals have been buried by centuries of sediment, while others were destroyed when the river gradually changed its course. What remains visible today hints at an intricate hydraulic landscape that required constant maintenance and coordination. Without such a system, the city could not have existed. The fortress itself represents another technological puzzle. Unlike many famous ancient fortifications built from stone, the citadel of Otrar was constructed primarily from rammed earth and mud brick. At first glance, such materials appear fragile and temporary, and yet large sections of the walls have survived for more than a millennium. The construction technique involved compressing layers of clay, sand, and gravel into thick, dense blocks that formed walls several meters wide. When properly maintained, these earthen fortifications could become remarkably resilient, resisting erosion from wind and seasonal weather. Engineers studying the remains of Otrar have noted that the walls were built in carefully layered stages, suggesting an advanced understanding of structural stability. This method allowed the citadel to support heavy defensive towers and elevated walkways that once lined its perimeter. Even after centuries of abandonment, the sheer mass of the structure still rises above the surrounding plains, like a fossilized monument to ancient construction techniques. The defensive layout of the citadel also reveals a sophisticated understanding of military architecture. Access to the fortress was carefully controlled through a limited number of gates, each positioned in ways that forced approaching attackers to slow down and expose themselves to defenders on the walls. In some areas, entry routes appear to have been deliberately angled rather than straight, creating choke points that could be easily defended. These design principles would later appear in many medieval fortresses across Eurasia, yet they were already present in Otrar centuries earlier. This raises intriguing questions about the development and spread of military engineering knowledge along the Silk Road. Was Otrar influenced by other fortress traditions, or did it help shape them? The city's importance extended far beyond military strength. Otrar was also a center of intellectual life during the medieval Islamic period. It is widely known as the birthplace of the philosopher Al-Farabi, one of the most influential thinkers of the Islamic Golden Age. Historical sources describe Otrar as a place where scholars, merchants, and travelers exchanged knowledge and ideas. The city's libraries and educational institutions reportedly housed significant collections of manuscripts, though almost none of these survive today. Wars, fires, and the passage of time have erased much of this intellectual legacy, leaving archaeologists with only fragments of buildings that once supported vibrant scholarly activity. Otra's place in world history became even more dramatic in the early 13th century. In 1218, thus a diplomatic crisis occurred when a caravan associated with the Mongol ruler Genghis Khan was seized in the city. The incident triggered a massive Mongol invasion of Central Asia. Otra was besieged for months before ultimately falling to the Mongol armies. Historical chronicles describe the destruction of the city and the massacre of many of its inhabitants. Yet the story did not end there. Archaeological evidence shows that Otra was rebuilt after the invasion and continued to function as a regional center for several centuries. Its resilience demonstrates how vital the oasis remained to trade and agriculture even after catastrophic warfare. Despite surviving invasions and political upheavals, the city eventually faced a different and more mysterious fate. By the 17th century, Otrar had been completely abandoned. The citadel that once commanded a thriving urban landscape became an empty mound, rising above the steppe. This final disappearance remains one of the greatest mysteries associated with the site. Unlike cities destroyed by a single dramatic event, Otrar appears to have faded gradually from history. Written sources from the later periods become increasingly scarce, leaving archaeologists to reconstruct the story from environmental evidence and scattered ruins. One of the leading theories points to changes in the course of the Syr River. Over long periods, large rivers naturally shift their channels, sometimes moving several kilometers away from earlier routes. If the river gradually drifted away from Otrar's irrigation canals, the agricultural system that sustained the city would have collapsed, fields would have dried out, and crops would have failed, and the population would have been forced to relocate. This scenario is supported by geological studies showing significant river movement in the region over the past several centuries. Yet this explanation alone may not fully account for the city's disappearance. Another possibility involves the broader decline of the Silk Road trading networks. From the 16th century onward, maritime trade routes between Europe and Asia became increasingly dominant. As ocean travel replaced caravan commerce, many inland trade cities lost their economic importance. Otrar, once a critical stop along caravan routes, may have gradually lost the commercial activity that sustained its population. Without trade revenues and agricultural stability, maintaining the extensive irrigation canals and defensive structures would have become increasingly difficult. Climate change may also have played a role. Evidence from Central Asian environmental studies suggests that certain periods experienced increased aridity, which could have intensified desertification around the oasis. Even small reductions in water availability might have triggered a chain reaction affecting agriculture, population stability, and urban sustainability. Combined with shifting river channels and economic changes, these environmental pressures could have slowly undermined the city's viability. What makes the mystery particularly fascinating is that no single explanation fully resolves the question. Instead, the disappearance of Otrar likely resulted from a combination of environmental, economic, and social transformations unfolding over generations. The citadel that once symbolized power and resilience eventually became a silent ruin, its massive earthen walls slowly eroding under the winds of the steppe. Today, the fortress of Otrar Oasis Citadel stands as a haunting reminder of how even the most important cities of the ancient world can vanish almost entirely from human memory. Beneath the layers of soil and collapsed mud brick lie the traces of a city that once connected civilizations, shaped historical events, and nurtured intellectual life. Yet the final chapter of Otrar's story remains incomplete. Archaeologists continue to study the site, hoping that new discoveries will reveal more about how such a powerful fortress and the great oasis city around it ultimately disappeared into the sands of Central Asia. What do you think truly caused Otrar, once a thriving city on the Silk Road, to disappear from history? Share your thoughts in the comments below.